Today, I've prepared the biography of Lao Tzu. Before you fall asleep, make sure to tell us from where you're listening and what time it is. Now, calm down and listen to the story while falling asleep. I'm wishing you a cozy and comfortable night. As you settle into your soft pillows and feel the weight of the day melting away, let your mind drift back to ancient China, where a gentle philosopher named Lao Tzu once walked. His wisdom has soothed troubled minds for thousands of years. Much like the gentle rhythm of your breathing is calming you now. The story of this mysterious sage will carry you softly into your dreams, like leaves floating on a peaceful stream. Let your eyelids grow heavy as we journey together through the misty mountains of time to meet a man whose words still whisper timeless comfort to the world. In the gentle mists of ancient China, long before our modern world took shape, there lived a soul whose wisdom would echo through the corridors of time. This was Lao Tzu, whose name translates to Old Master, a fitting title for one whose thoughts would become timeless treasures of human contemplation. Let us drift back together, like autumn leaves carried on a tranquil stream, to the early days of this remarkable philosopher. The exact details of Lao Tzu's birth remain draped in the soft shadows of history, much like the morning fog that would have blanketed the valleys of ancient China. Most scholars believe he was born in the state of Chu, in what is now known as the Henan province, sometime in the 6th century BCE during the Zhou dynasty. This was a time when China was experiencing profound changes, when the old ways were slowly giving way to new ideas, much like how night gradually surrenders to the gentle approach of dawn. Imagine the small village where young Lao Tzu might have opened his eyes for the first time. Simple wooden homes with curved, tiled roofs stood amidst fields of swaying grain. The air would have carried the sweet scent of blossoming plum trees in spring, and the distant sounds of farmers working their land with patient dedication. It was a world governed by the rhythm of seasons, where people lived close to nature and observed its eternal cycles. The family into which Lao Tzu was born was likely not of noble status, but rather humble folk who understood the value of simple living. His father might have been a farmer or perhaps a minor official in the local government. In those days, families lived together in extended households, with several generations sharing the same dwelling. Young Lao Tzu would have grown up surrounded by grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, each contributing to his early understanding of human relationships and the natural order of things. As a child, Lao Tzu would have awakened with the first light of dawn, when the world was still wrapped in that special quietude that precedes the day's activities. Perhaps he helped with morning chores, feeding chickens that pecked contentedly in the yard, or drawing water from the village well, the wooden bucket creating gentle ripples in the water's surface as it was lowered. These simple tasks, performed day after day, might have planted the seeds of his later philosophy about the importance of finding harmony in routine and simplicity. The education of children in ancient China was centered around practical knowledge and moral teachings. Young boys like Lao Tzu would have learned the basics of reading and writing by tracing characters in trays of sand before progressing to bamboo slips and brushes. They memorized classic texts through repetition, their young voices rising and falling in a soothing cadence as they recited ancient wisdom under the watchful eye of a village elder or scholar. Imagine young Lao Tzu sitting cross-legged on a woven mat, his small fingers carefully forming the intricate Chinese characters, each stroke a meditation in itself. The teacher, perhaps an older man with a long white beard and kind eyes, would move slowly among his pupils, offering gentle corrections and words of encouragement. These early lessons in patience and careful attention would have resonated deeply with the boy who would one day write about the virtue of stillness. The changing seasons would have marked the rhythm of Lao Tzu's childhood. Spring brought the planting of crops, with families working together to prepare the soil and sow seeds. Summer days were long and filled with the sound of insects humming in the tall grass. Autumn harvests were times of community celebration, with neighbors helping neighbors to gather the bounty before winter's arrival. And winter itself was a time of turning inward, of stories told around the warmth of a fire, of reflection and rest. During these formative years, Lao Tzu likely spent much time in nature, observing the ways of animals and plants, the flow of rivers, the steadfastness of mountains. Perhaps he had a favorite spot, a gnarled old tree by a stream, or a quiet hillside overlooking the village, where he would sit for hours, simply watching and listening. In these moments of quiet contemplation, he might have first glimpsed the concept of wu wei, or non-action, the understanding that sometimes the wisest course is to allow things to unfold naturally, without interference. The Zhou dynasty, during which Lao Tzu lived, was a time of significant cultural and philosophical development in China. The old feudal system was gradually breaking down, and with it, many traditional certainties were being questioned. This period, often referred to as the 100 Schools of Thought, saw the emergence of various philosophical traditions, including Confucianism, which would become both a counterpoint and complement to Lao Tzu's own teachings. As Lao Tzu grew from a thoughtful child into a contemplative young man, the world around him was changing. Cities were growing larger, trade was expanding, and the simple agricultural life was becoming more complex. Perhaps it was this shift away from simplicity that first prompted him to consider the value of returning to a more natural way of being, a theme that would later permeate his philosophical writings. In his teenage years, Lao Tzu might have begun his service as a record keeper at the Zhou court, a role that tradition assigns to him. Picture a slender young man with alert eyes and a quiet demeanor, moving through the corridors of the royal archives. Here, surrounded by bamboo scrolls containing the wisdom and history of generations, he would have had access to a wealth of knowledge few others could claim. The soft rustling of ancient scrolls being carefully unrolled, the faint scent of ink and aged bamboo, the hushed atmosphere of reverence for learning. All these would have formed the backdrop to his intellectual development. The royal archives would have contained not just historical records, but also astronomical observations, agricultural guides, military strategies, and philosophical discourses. As Lao Tzu tended to these precious documents, he would have absorbed their contents, allowing diverse streams of thought to flow through his mind and settle into new patterns of understanding. This exposure to varied ideas, combined with his own natural inclination toward reflection, would have formed the foundation of his unique perspective. Outside the walls of the archive, life in the capital city would have presented a stark contrast to the rural simplicity of his childhood. Streets filled with merchants calling out their wares, officials in elaborate robes hurrying to court appointments, soldiers drilling information, and common people going about their daily business. All this human activity, with its ambitions and conflicts, might have reinforced his appreciation for quietude and simplicity. It was perhaps during these years that Lao Tzu began to formulate his ideas about the Tao, or the Way, that ineffable principle that underlies all existence. Watching the complex interplay of court politics, seeing how striving often led to suffering, and observing how natural systems thrived without forced effort, he might have started to articulate his philosophy of yielding and flowing with life rather than struggling against it. The relationship between Lao Tzu and Confucius is one of those beautiful historical possibilities that we can imagine unfolding like a conversation between two streams joining to form a river. According to tradition, Confucius, who was younger than Lao Tzu, once traveled to consult with the older sage. Picture this meeting: Confucius, earnest and focused on proper ritual and social order, seeking wisdom from the quiet keeper of archives, who had begun to see beyond such structures to the underlying reality. After their meeting, Confucius is said to have remarked to his disciples, "I know how birds can fly, how fish can swim, how animals can run. But the dragon is beyond my understanding. It ascends into the sky on the wind and the clouds." This poetic assessment speaks to the profound and elusive nature of Lao Tzu's wisdom, which seemed to transcend conventional understanding. As Lao Tzu moved through middle age, the political climate of China continued to grow more turbulent. The Zhou dynasty was weakening, and the period known as the Warring States was beginning to take shape. Lords of various regions engaged in constant power struggles, raising armies and forming alliances only to break them when advantageous. The simple harmony that Lao Tzu valued was increasingly rare in this landscape of ambition and conflict. Perhaps it was this growing discord that prompted Lao Tzu to consider leaving the increasingly chaotic world of human affairs. Tradition tells us that in his later years, he decided to journey westward, seeking solitude and a simpler way of life. As he approached the Hangu Pass, the guardian of the gate, a man named Yinzai, recognized him as a sage and asked him to record his wisdom before departing civilization. Imagine this scene. An elderly man with a serene face and white hair that flows like a waterfall down his back, leading an ox upon which he has placed his few possessions. The mountain pass rises before him, its rugged peaks reaching toward the sky like fingers seeking to touch the heavens. The gatekeeper, perhaps sensing something special in this traveler, approaches with reverence. In just over 5,000 words, Lao Tzu distilled a lifetime of observation and reflection. He wrote of the value of emptiness, the strength found in yielding, the wisdom of not knowing, and the virtue of non-action. His words flowed like water finding its natural course, simple yet profound, accessible yet inexhaustible in their depth. After completing this text, tradition tells us that Lao Tzu continued westward and disappeared into the mists of history. Some say he lived out his days as a hermit in the mountains, communing with nature and embodying the principles he had articulated. Others suggest he might have traveled as far as India, possibly influencing or being influenced by early Buddhist thought. Still others believe he achieved immortality, transcending the physical realm to become one with the Tao he so eloquently described. The truth of Lao Tzu's later years remains as gentle a mystery as morning dew on a lotus leaf, beautiful in its uncertainty, perfect in its impermanence. What remains beyond doubt is the enduring impact of his early life experiences on the wisdom he eventually shared with the world. The simplicity of rural life, the rhythm of seasons, the patient practice of calligraphy, the quiet hours spent in nature, the observations of humans striving at court. All these elements combined to form the unique perspective that would become Taoism, from a childhood spent in harmony with natural cycles, came a philosophy that continues to remind us of the value of such harmony in our own lives. As we drift toward sleep, let us carry with us this image of young Lao Tzu, sitting quietly by a stream, watching the water flow around rocks rather than struggling against them, observing how the tallest trees catch the most wind while the flexible bamboo bends and survives the storm. In these simple observations were the seeds of wisdom that would flower into one of humanity's most enduring philosophical traditions. A tradition that reminds us, even now, that sometimes the path to peace is found not in doing more, but in being still, not in knowing everything, but in embracing mystery, not in forcing our way, but in finding our flow. And so, like a leaf gently carried on a stream, we can allow ourselves to be carried into restful slumber, knowing that the wisdom of Lao Tzu born from those quiet early days in ancient China, continues to flow through time, offering its soothing perspective to all who pause long enough to listen. Let us drift further into the story as we explore the next part of this fascinating journey. In the soft mist of ancient China, in a time when memory and myth intertwine like morning dew on blades of grass, Lao Tzu was born. His family history stretches back into the gentle shadows of the past, where time moves like the slow current of a river, winding through a peaceful valley. Let us journey together through the quiet tapestry of his ancestry, allowing the soothing rhythms of his family story to carry us toward restful contemplation. Lao Tzu, whose name means Old Master, is believed to have been born in the village of Chu-Jen in the state of Chu during the later years of the Zhou dynasty. His family name was Li, and he was given the name meaning ear, perhaps because his ears were unusually large or uniquely shaped. The Li family had roots that extended deep into the rich soil of Chinese history, their lineage flowing through generations like a serene underground stream, nourishing each new life with the wisdom of those who came before. The Li family lived simply, in harmony with the natural world around them. They were not nobility, but rather humble keepers of knowledge, tending to both the land and to ancient texts with equal care and devotion. Lao Tzu's ancestors were said to be scholars who served as record keepers and archivists, preserving the cultural memory of their civilization through carefully maintained scrolls and oral traditions passed down through generations. Imagine the quiet evenings in the Li household, where young Lao Tzu would sit by the warm glow of oil lamps, listening to his grandfather's voice, soft and melodious, recounting tales of ancestors who had walked the earth centuries before. These stories were not simply entertainment, but vessels of wisdom, carrying the accumulated insights of generations across the gentle waves of time. His mother, whose name has been lost to history like petals scattered by a spring breeze, was said to have been a woman of remarkable patience and intuitive wisdom. She moved through their modest home with quiet grace, teaching her son to observe the natural world with attentive eyes. From her, it is said, Lao Tzu learned to appreciate the profound significance of seemingly insignificant moments. The way morning light filters through bamboo leaves, the patient persistence of water wearing away stone, the silent eloquence of unspoken truths. His father worked as a minor official in the regional court, a position that provided the family with stability without the burden of great wealth or the distractions of political ambition. In the evenings, he would return home with stories of human nature, observed in the complex dance of court politics, tales that would later inform his sons' understanding of power, leadership, and the virtues of restraint. The Li family lived in a small dwelling nestled among gentle hills, where the changing seasons marked the rhythm of their days. Their home was constructed of earth and timber, with paper windows that filtered the sunlight into a soft, diffuse glow. Inside, the floors were swept clean each morning, and simple furnishings arranged with an eye toward harmony and balance, principles that would later infuse Lao Tzu's philosophical writings. As the seasons turned, the Li family participated in the agricultural cycles that sustained their community. In spring, they would plant rice in the paddies that stretched like mirrors, reflecting the sky. Summer brought long days of tending and watching as green shoots reached toward the sun. Autumn was a time of harvest and gratitude, when the family would join their neighbors in gathering the bounty that would sustain them through winter's quiet contemplation. Throughout these cycles, the Li family maintained traditions that connected them to their ancestors and to the cultural heritage of China. During festivals, they would prepare special foods and offer them first to those who had passed into the realm of memory. They would light incense and bow 3 times before the small ancestral shrine kept in their home, acknowledging the unbroken thread that connected them to all who had come before. Young Lao Tzu absorbed these rituals not as mere formalities, but as expressions of a deeper truth, that all life is connected in ways that transcend the boundaries of time and individual existence. This understanding would later emerge in his teachings about the Tao, the ineffable way that flows through all things, connecting past, present, and future in one seamless continuum. The Li family's cultural roots extended into the rich soil of Taoist folk practices that predated formal Taoist philosophy. They observed the balance of yin and yang in all things, the interplay of darkness and light, receptivity and action, earth and sky. These concepts were not abstract theories, but lived experiences, embodied in the simple routines of daily life and in their relationship with the natural world. In the cool evenings, Lao Tzu's grandmother would brew tea from herbs gathered in the surrounding hills. As steam rose from the earthenware cups, she would share stories of the family's distant ancestors, wise women who knew the healing properties of plants, men who could read the patterns of weather in the flight of birds, children who dreamed prophetic dreams. These tales were not merely family lore, but a form of ancestral wisdom, transmitted through generations like precious heirlooms. One such story told of a great-great-grandfather who had been a court astrologer during a time of political upheaval. Rather than aligning himself with any faction, he had withdrawn to a mountain hermitage where he spent his remaining years observing the movements of stars and composing poetry that spoke of finding peace amidst chaos. This ancestor's choice to step away from conflict rather than engage with it directly would later echo in Lao Tzu's teachings about the power of non-action and the wisdom of withdrawal. Another family tale described an ancestress who had survived a devastating flood by following the example of the willow tree bending rather than breaking, allowing the waters to flow around her rather than standing rigid. against their force. But the Li family's home was situated near a small stream that wound its way through the valley like a silver ribbon. Young Lao Tzu spent countless hours by its banks, watching the water's endless journey. He observed how it flowed around obstacles rather than confronting them, how it found the path of least resistance, yet over time shaped even the hardest stone. In the gentle murmur of this stream, he heard the first whispers of what would later become his philosophy of the Tao, the way that accomplishes all things by not doing, that shapes all things by not forcing. As the years passed, with the unhurried pace of clouds drifting across a summer sky, Lao Tzu grew from a thoughtful child into a contemplative young man. His family noticed his unusual capacity for stillness, his ability to observe deeply without judgment, his natural inclination toward simplicity in all things. These qualities were nurtured within the Li household, where wisdom was valued above cleverness, and harmony was prized above achievement. When Lao Tzu reached the age of learning, his father arranged for him to study with a respected scholar in a nearby village. Each day, the young man would walk along winding paths through misty bamboo groves to reach his teacher's modest dwelling. The journey itself became part of his education, an opportunity to observe the subtle changes in nature, to feel the earth beneath his feet, to practice the art of mindful presence that would later infuse his teachings. His formal education included the study of ancient texts, the practice of calligraphy, and the memorization of classical poetry. But it was the spaces between these structured lessons, the quiet moments of observation, the silent intervals of reflection, that most deeply shaped his emerging worldview. While other students sought to accumulate knowledge like collectors gathering precious objects, Lao Tzu began to understand the value of emptiness, of making space for insight to arise naturally. Like water welling up from a hidden spring, the Li family's cultural heritage included a deep respect for the complementary forces of creativity and receptivity. In their household, art was not separate from daily life, but integrated into its fabric. Lao Tzu's mother was skilled in the art of embroidery, creating patterns that reflected the natural world around them. His father practiced calligraphy, finding in each brushstroke a meditation on the balance between control and surrender. These artistic practices were not mere diversions, but expressions of a worldview that valued harmony, balance, and the marriage of opposing forces. As evening shadows lengthened across the valley and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the Li family would gather to share the day's experiences. These conversations were never hurried, each person speaking in turn, their words given space to resonate before another voice joined the gentle flow of dialogue. Young Lao Tzu learned from these family counsels the art of listening deeply, of allowing silence to be as meaningful as speech, of finding truth not in forceful argument, but in the quiet emergence of shared understanding. The cultural context of Lao Tzu's origins was one of transition and transformation. The Zhou dynasty was in its declining years, its centralized authority fragmenting into competing states. The old certainties were giving way to new questions, and traditional ways of life were being challenged by emerging philosophies and changing social structures. It was a time when many thinkers were grappling with fundamental questions about the nature of reality, the basis of ethical action, and the proper relationship between humanity and the natural world. Within this context of cultural ferment, the Li family maintained a center of quiet stability. Their adherence to ancestral traditions provided a sense of continuity amidst change, while their openness to observation and reflection allowed them to adapt to shifting circumstances without losing their essential values. This balance between rootedness and flexibility would later inform Lao Tzu's understanding of the Tao as both unchanging in its essence and constantly changing in its manifestations. As we rest in the gentle embrace of these ancient family stories, we might imagine young Lao Tzu sitting beneath a gnarled old tree, watching as clouds form and dissolve in the vast sky above. In this moment of quiet contemplation, we can sense the seeds of wisdom taking root in fertile soil, wisdom that would eventually blossom into one of the world's most enduring philosophical traditions. The soft rhythm of his breathing merges with our own, and we find ourselves drifting toward sleep, carried on currents of ancient wisdom that flow from a simple family dwelling in ancient China to our own resting place in the present moment. And so, cradled in the gentle arms of this ancestral wisdom, we allow ourselves to let go, to surrender to rest, to flow like water seeking its natural level. The story of Lao Tzu's family continues to unfold within us, its rhythms becoming the rhythms of our dreams, its wisdom seeping into our being like morning dew absorbed by thirsty soil. And as we drift deeper into sleep, we carry with us the simple, profound truth that emerged from those ancient family traditions, that in yielding we find strength, in emptiness we find fulfillment, in letting go we find our way home. The peaceful narrative of this life continues as we turn our attention to what happened next. In the gentle mists of ancient China, during the 6th century BCE, a child named Lao Tzu opened his eyes to a world of subtle beauty and natural harmony. The exact location of his birth remains veiled in the soft shadows of history, though many believe it was in the small village of Ku in the state of Chu, nestled within what we now call the Henan province. This land, cradled between the flowing waters of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, was a tapestry of rolling hills, fertile valleys, and ancient forests that stretched toward distant mountains like fingers reaching for the sky. The morning air in Lao Tzu's childhood village carried the sweet scent of osmanthus flowers in autumn and the earthy aroma of rain-soaked soil after summer storms. Dawn would break with the gentle cooing of doves and the melodic calls of magpies, nature's own lullaby that greeted each new day. The young Lao Tzu would often awaken to these sounds, his consciousness gradually emerging from dreams, like a butterfly slowly unfurling its wings after a restful night within its chrysalis. His family dwelling was modest, yet sufficient, constructed of natural materials that breathed with the seasons. Walls of packed earth and wooden beams created a sanctuary that felt like an extension of the earth itself. The thatched roof overhead whispered with each passing breeze, telling stories of distant places the wind had traveled. Small windows allowed dappled sunlight to dance across the earthen floor, creating patterns that shifted throughout the day, like thoughts drifting through a meditative mind. In the central room, a clay hearth provided warmth during the cool months and served as the heart of family life. Here, meals were prepared with ingredients harvested from nearby gardens and gathered from the surrounding wilderness. The aroma of millet porridge simmering in the morning, seasoned with wild herbs and perhaps a precious pinch of salt, would fill the home with a comforting embrace that beckoned family members to gather and share in the day's first nourishment. The rhythm of life in Lao Tzu's childhood flowed with the natural cycles of the sun, moon, and seasons. Each day unfolded with unhurried purpose, beginning with the soft glow of dawn and concluding with the gentle descent of twilight. The household would rise with the sun, moving through daily tasks with a mindfulness that later would become central to Lao Tzu's philosophy. Water was drawn from a nearby stream, its surface reflecting the morning sky like a mirror connecting earth and heaven. The cool liquid would slip through fingers as it was carried in wooden buckets, some drops returning to the earth in a small but perfect cycle. Outside the dwelling, a small garden provided vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants. Young Lao Tzu might have helped tend these growing things, learning the patience of cultivation and the wisdom of working with rather than against nature's own timing. His small hands would have felt the cool, damp soil between his fingers, connecting him to the earth that sustained all life. Perhaps here, watching seeds transform into nourishing plants, he first contemplated the mysteries of change and continuity that would later inform his understanding of the Tao. Beyond the immediate surroundings of home and garden stretched the wider community, a collection of similar dwellings where extended family and neighbors lived in close proximity. The village existed as a living organism, each household contributing to its sustenance and well-being. Paths worn smooth by generations of footsteps connected these homes, creating a web of relationships that provided security and belonging. Children's laughter would ripple through the air as they played together, inventing games with simple objects found in nature. Sticks became swords, stones became treasures, and fallen leaves became boats to sail on puddles after rain. The social fabric of Lao Tzu's childhood was woven from the threads of Confucian values that emphasized family harmony, respect for elders, and proper social relationships. Yet in the state of Chu, these values were colored by local traditions that embraced a more mystical connection to nature. Unlike the more rigid hierarchies of northern China, the southern state of Chu maintained stronger ties to shamanic practices and nature worship that predated Confucian thought. This unique cultural blend created an environment where young Lao Tzu could absorb both structured social wisdom and the more intuitive understanding of humanity's place within the natural world. In the evenings, as shadows lengthened across the village, families would gather to share the day's final meal. Oil lamps cast a warm, golden glow that softened faces and created intimate spaces for conversation and storytelling. Elders might recount tales of ancestors or share the wisdom accumulated through their years of experience. The young Lao Tzu would have listened attentively, absorbing not just the words, but the cadence and rhythm of oral tradition. Perhaps it was during these quiet evening gatherings that he first recognized how wisdom could be transmitted through simple stories and observations, rather than complex arguments or declarations. Beyond the village lay the wider natural world that served as both classroom and sanctuary for the developing philosopher. Ancient forests of pine, oak, and bamboo created cathedral-like spaces where sunlight filtered through leaves in ever-changing patterns. The forest floor was a soft carpet of moss and fallen needles that muffled footsteps, creating a silence in which one could hear the subtle sounds often missed. The rustle of a small animal moving through underbrush, the gentle tap of dewdrops falling from leaves, the whisper of wind through high branches that sounded almost like distant conversation. Streams and rivers carved their patient paths through the landscape, embodying the principle that would later become central to Lao Tzu's teaching. That water, in its yielding softness, overcomes the hardest obstacles. The young boy might have spent hours watching the water's movement, observing how it flowed around rocks rather than struggling against them, how it always found the lowest path, yet ultimately reached the vast ocean. These quiet moments of observation would have nurtured his contemplative nature and laid the foundation for insights that would eventually be recorded in the Tao Te Ching. The changing seasons brought their own lessons in the natural cycle of growth, fullness, decline, and renewal. Spring arrived with a burst of new life. Tender green shoots emerging from the soil, fruit trees covered in delicate blossoms that perfumed the air, birds returning from their winter journeys to build nests and raise young. Summer brought abundance and activity, with longer days filled with the buzzing of insects and the rustling of fully leafed trees. Autumn painted the landscape in rich golds, reds, and browns as nature prepared for the coming dormancy, while winter brought a different kind of beauty, the stark elegance of bare branches against the sky, the hushed quality of snowfall, the gathering of family around the hearth during the longest nights. The night sky itself was a source of wonder and contemplation for all who lived in this ancient time, unspoiled by artificial light. After sunset, the heavens revealed their splendor in a canopy of stars so numerous and bright they seemed close enough to touch. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a celestial river, mirroring the earthly waters below. Lao Tzu would have learned to recognize the patterns of stars and their movements through the seasons. Another manifestation of the cosmic order that underlay all existence. Market days brought a different kind of energy to the otherwise tranquil rhythm of village life. Merchants and farmers from surrounding areas would gather to trade goods, creating a temporary community vibrant with color, sound, and movement. The air would fill with the mingled scents of spices, fresh produce, and the earthy odor of livestock. Voices called out offering wares or negotiating prices, creating a human melody that rose and fell like waves for a curious child like Lao Tzu. These gatherings offered glimpses into the wider world beyond his immediate surroundings. Strange objects from distant places, unfamiliar accents and dialects. The diverse ways people engaged with one another in the dance of commerce and conversation. The political environment of Lao Tzu's childhood was one of transition and uncertainty. The once powerful Zhou dynasty had weakened, its authority increasingly nominal as regional states asserted their independence. This period, known as the Spring and Autumn period, was characterized by shifting alliances, philosophical ferment, and the emergence of 100 schools of thought. While young Lao Tzu would not have understood the complexities of these political changes, he would have absorbed the atmosphere of questioning and seeking new paths forward that permeated intellectual circles of the time. Within his household, daily life continued regardless of these larger currents. The women of the family would spin and weave, transforming raw fibers into thread and then into cloth with patient, rhythmic movements that seemed to embody the continuous creation of the universe itself. The men might work in fields or practice crafts, their hands developing the wisdom that comes only through direct engagement with materials and tasks. Children were integrated into these activities from an early age, learning not through formal instruction, but through observation and gradually increasing participation. The sounds of his childhood created an auditory landscape as rich and varied as the visual one. The hollow tone of bamboo wind chimes, the melodic notes of the gyukin, played by a skilled musician during festivals, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables being prepared for a meal, the distant barking of dogs announcing visitors, the soft murmur of adults in conversation. All these sounds wove together into a tapestry that formed the backdrop of Lao Tzu's earliest experiences and memories. Water played a central role in daily life, not just for practical purposes, but as a source of joy and refreshment. On hot summer days, children might wade in shallow streams, feeling the cool current flow between their toes and watching small fish dart away from their shadows. The sound of water, whether the gentle gurgle of a brook, the steady patter of rain on the roof, or the distant rumble of thunder announcing an approaching storm, provided a constant reminder of nature's presence and power. As darkness fell each evening, the village would gradually grow quiet. Oil lamps would be extinguished one by one as families settled into rest. In this darkness, broken only by moonlight or the distant pinpoints of stars, young Lao Tzu would lie on his sleeping mat, perhaps listening to the night sounds, the chorus of frogs and insects, the occasional call of a night bird, the soft breathing of family members nearby. In these quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, his mind might have drifted into the kind of receptive state where the deepest insights often arrive unbidden. The physical and social environment of Lao Tzu's childhood thus provided fertile ground for the development of a philosophy that would emphasize harmony with nature, simplicity of living, and the wisdom of non-action. The natural world served as both teacher and metaphor, offering lessons that no human instructor could provide. The social structures of family and village demonstrated both the value of proper relationships and the limitations of rigid hierarchies. The political uncertainty of the broader world perhaps suggested the need for a different approach to finding stability and peace. As we imagine this ancient childhood unfolding in a world so different from our own, we might feel ourselves transported across time and space, our breathing slowing to match the unhurried rhythm of life in that distant age. The sensory details, the scent of earth after rain, the taste of simple food shared with family, the feel of cool water on skin during summer heat, the sight of stars wheeling overhead through the seasons, the sound of wind in bamboo groves, create a tapestry that envelops us in gentle awareness. And as our thoughts drift with these images, becoming less focused and more dreamlike, we might sense how the seeds of wisdom planted in that ancient childhood grew into teachings that still offer comfort and guidance today. Our own breathing deepens, our muscles relax, and we begin to float on the current of these ancient memories, carried toward the peaceful shores of sleep like a leaf on a stream, finding its way to the waiting sea. As you relax deeper, let us now softly explore the next chapter of this soothing biography. In the gentle mist of ancient China, young Lao Tzu's education began not in formal classrooms or with written texts, but in the quiet observation of the world around him. Unlike the structured learning that would characterize later Confucian traditions, his intellectual development followed the natural rhythms of rural life, unfolding slowly like a lotus opening at dawn. The soft morning light filtering through paper windows would find the boy already awake, absorbing the wisdom of everyday moments that others might overlook. His first teachers were the elders of his village, whose weathered faces and calloused hands spoke of lives lived in harmony with the changing seasons. In the evenings, as oil lamps cast their warm glow and shadows danced across walls of packed earth. These wise ones would share stories passed down through generations. Their voices, sometimes barely above whispers, carried tales of ancient rulers, moral lessons, and the timeless wisdom of those who had walked the earth before them. Young Lao Tzu would listen, his eyes half closed, letting the words sink deeply into his consciousness, like rainwater into thirsty soil. One elder in particular, whose name has been lost to the gentle erosion of time, recognized something special in the quiet, thoughtful child. This old man, said to have once served as a minor court official before returning to the simplicity of village life, took special interest in nurturing the boy's natural curiosity. On warm afternoons, they would walk together along winding paths through bamboo groves, stopping occasionally to observe a spider spinning its web or water finding its way around stones in a stream. Water, the old man would say in his soft, unhurried voice, is the softest thing in the world, yet it can overcome the hardest. The boy would nod, watching how the water never struggled against obstacles, but simply flowed around them, continuing its journey without effort or resistance as the seasons turned, and years passed like clouds across the sky. Lao Tzu's understanding deepened through such informal lessons. Unlike his contemporaries, who might have been studying the emerging Confucian classics, memorizing texts, and preparing for official examinations, his education came through direct experience and contemplation, the rhythm of agricultural life, planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in fall, and resting in winter, instilled in him an appreciation for natural cycles and the wisdom of appropriate timing. Nothing in nature hurried, yet everything was accomplished. This understanding would later become central to his teaching that Wu Wei, or non-action, paradoxically accomplishes more than forced effort. When Lao Tzu reached adolescence, it is said that he began to study the I Ching, or Book of Changes, one of China's most ancient texts. In those days, the I Ching was not simply read, but experienced through the casting of yarrow stalks in a meditative practice that connected the seeker with deeper patterns of existence under the guidance of another village elder skilled in divination. Lao Tzu would spend hours in the cool shade of old trees, learning to interpret the hexagrams that emerged from this practice, the I Ching's emphasis on constant change, the interplay of opposites, and the underlying unity of all things resonated deeply with his own observations of nature and human life. As evening shadows lengthened and crickets began their nightly chorus, the young man would often sit in solitude, allowing the day's lessons to settle in his mind like sediment in still water. These experiences of spontaneous insight convinced him that wisdom could not be pursued directly, but would reveal itself naturally when the mind became still and uncluttered, like the surface of a pond reflecting the moon. when undisturbed by ripples during his late teens and early 20s, as political unrest continued to spread throughout the Zhou dynasty. Lao Tzu began to encounter travelers passing through his region, merchants, minor officials, and occasionally scholars seeking refuge from turmoil elsewhere. These encounters broadened his understanding of the world beyond his immediate surroundings. One such traveler, a former court historian from a northern state, shared with him accounts of various rulers and their approaches to governance. Lao Tzu listened attentively as the man described how those who ruled with the lightest touch, respecting the natural tendencies of their people rather than imposing rigid controls, created the most harmonious societies. This historian also introduced him to the concept of the Tao, as it was understood in those early times. Not yet the fully developed philosophical system it would later become, but an intuitive recognition of an underlying principle or way that governed all existence. The idea resonated deeply with Lao Tzu, giving name to what he had already sensed in his observations of nature and human affairs. In the gentle hours before sleep, he would contemplate this concept, feeling its contours in his mind, like a blind person might feel the shape of an unfamiliar object, learning it through patient, attentive touch. As he matured into early adulthood, Lao Tzu's reputation for wisdom began to spread beyond his village. People would occasionally seek him out, traveling dusty roads to ask his advice on matters ranging from family disputes to agricultural decisions. Unlike many who might have used such recognition to elevate themselves, he remained humble, often answering questions with questions or simple observations that invited the seeker to find their own truth. The rain falls without trying to nourish the plants, he might say. Yet everything grows. His approach to helping others reflected his growing understanding that direct intervention often created unintended consequences, while subtle influence, like the barely perceptible pull of the moon on ocean tides, could guide without disturbing natural processes. This principle would later become central to his concept of leadership and teaching. During this period, it is said that Lao Tzu also began to explore various practices for cultivating vital energy, or qi, rising before dawn when the air was still and sweet with dew. He would practice slow, flowing movements coordinated with breath, forerunners of what would later develop into Tai Chi and Qigong. These practices deepened his sensitivity to the subtle currents of energy within his own body and in the world around him, reinforcing his understanding that the most powerful forces often operate invisibly and without strain. In his late 20s, according to some traditional accounts, Lao Tzu accepted a minor position as an archive keeper in the Zhou court. Whether this actually occurred or is a later embellishment to his biography remains uncertain. Like stars glimpsed through passing clouds, if he did indeed take such a position, it would have given him access to ancient records and writings that few others could study. In the hushed atmosphere of royal archives, surrounded by bamboo scrolls containing the wisdom of earlier ages, he would have had ample opportunity to deepen his understanding of history, governance, and the patterns that connected past and present. The contrast between the simplicity of his early life and the complexity of court politics would have provided fertile ground for reflection. Observing the elaborate rituals, power struggles, and artifice of court life, he may have developed his characteristic skepticism toward conventional status and achievement, like watching a complicated machine with too many moving parts. He could see how excess complexity led to breakdown and dysfunction, while simplicity in governance, in personal conduct, in thought itself, created resilience and sustainability, whether at court or in more humble circumstances. Lao Tzu continued his practice of quiet observation and reflection throughout his 30s and 40s. Unlike many philosophers who actively sought to promote their ideas or gather disciples, he seemed content to allow his understanding to deepen naturally, sharing insights only when circumstances made it appropriate. This reluctance to push his wisdom forward paradoxically increased others' recognition of its value. Like a rare flower that becomes more precious because it blooms in hidden places as he entered middle age, Lao Tzu's thinking began to crystallize around several key insights that would form the foundation of his philosophical legacy. The concept of wu-wei, or non-action, evolved from his early observations of water and natural processes into a sophisticated understanding of how conscious non-interference allows inherent patterns to manifest. His appreciation for the complementary nature of opposites, what would later be symbolized in the familiar yin-yang symbol, grew from seeing how phenomena naturally generated their opposites, how rest enabled activity, how emptiness created usefulness, how yielding overcame resistance. Perhaps most importantly, his understanding of the Tao itself deepened from an abstract concept into a lived experience of the underlying unity and process that gives rise to all phenomena. In moments of profound stillness, often in the boundary between wakefulness and sleep, he would experience a dissolution of the boundaries between self and world, a direct apprehension of being part of something vast and flowing, yet intimately present in each moment and each thing. Words could point toward this understanding, but never fully capture it, like trying to describe the taste of water to someone who has never drunk, or the feeling of wind to someone who has never felt its touch upon their skin. By his 50s, Lao Tzu had developed a reputation as someone who embodied the very wisdom he had discovered. His movements had the unhurried grace of one perfectly at ease in the world. His words, when he chose to speak, carried the weight of direct experience rather than borrowed knowledge. His presence itself had a calming effect on others, like entering a peaceful garden after walking busy streets. Those who spent time with him often found their own agitation and confusion settling, not through any deliberate teaching on his part, but through the contagious quality of his own centered awareness. It was during this period, according to tradition, that circumstances led to the writing of the Tao Te Ching, the text that would preserve his wisdom for future generations, whether prompted by a border guard who recognized his value and requested that he leave a record of his insights before departing the kingdom, or by his own recognition of the need to distill his understanding into a form that could benefit others. Lao Tzu is said to have composed the 81 brief chapters that constitute this remarkable work. The text itself reflects the nature of his education and intellectual development, not systematic or linear like a treatise, but organic and intuitive, circling around central insights and approaching them from different angles, like walking around a mountain and glimpsing it through changing light and weather. Each chapter has the quality of something perceived in a moment of clarity and set down with minimal elaboration, like sketches made by a master artist who needs only a few strokes to capture the essence of a landscape. As we imagine Lao Tzu completing this text, perhaps we can picture him in the gentle light of early morning, brush in hand, each character flowing onto the bamboo or silk with the same natural ease that characterized his understanding of life itself. The completed work, modest in size but immeasurable in depth, would become one of the most translated and studied texts in human history, not because its author sought fame or influence, but because wisdom offered without agenda has a way of finding those who need it most, like water flowing naturally to the lowest places. And as we follow the course of this remarkable life and intellectual journey, perhaps we too can feel ourselves settling into a more natural rhythm, our breathing deepening, our thoughts becoming less urgent and more spacious. The wisdom that arose from Lao Tzu's patient observation and receptive awareness invites us to a similar quieting, a similar letting go of effort as sleep approaches like a gentle tide rising on a peaceful shore. We might sense how the same Tao that flowed through his life flows also through ours, connecting us across the centuries in the shared experience of being human, of seeking understanding, and of finding rest in the natural unfolding of each moment. Our soothing biography continues with a look at the next important period in this incredible life. The story of Lao Tzu's wisdom is not one of sudden revelation, but of quiet absorption, like the way a river gathers its strength from countless unseen springs. His understanding of the Tao did not arise in isolation, but was nurtured by the subtle influences of those who crossed his path, teachers who spoke in riddles, elders who moved with effortless grace, and chance encounters that left deep imprints on his soul. These relationships were like the soft brushstrokes of a painting, each one adding depth and texture to the harmony of his thought. One of the earliest and most enduring influences on Lao Tzu was his grandfather, a man whose name has been lost to time, but whose presence lingered in the young boy's memory like the scent of old books and incense. He was a scholar, but not the rigid kind who clung to dogma. Instead, he moved through life with a lightness, as if he understood some secret rhythm beneath the surface of things. As a child, Lao Tzu would sit beside him in the courtyard, watching the way the old man's hands moved, slow, deliberate, never rushed, as he tended to his inkstone, or smoothed a sheet of bamboo for writing. When the boy asked him questions, his answers were never direct, but always carried the hint of something deeper. The child once asked, "It was in these small moments that the seeds of Lao Tzu's later teachings were planted, not through grand lectures, but through the quiet demonstration of a life in harmony with nature." As he grew older, his path led him to the Royal Archives, where he served as a keeper of records. Here, he encountered another mentor, an elderly archivist named Master Li, a man who seemed to carry the weight of centuries in his stooped shoulders, but whose eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. Master Li was not like the other scholars who prized rigid systems of thought. Instead, he spoke in riddles and paradoxes, often leaving Lao Tzu to ponder his words for days. Once, when the young man complained about the complexity of governance, Master Li set down his brush and murmured, "The best rulers are those whose people barely know they exist." This idea would later blossom into one of Lao Tzu's central teachings, that true leadership is not about control, but about presence without interference, like the sky holding the stars without grasping at them. Yet not all his teachers were human. Some of his most profound lessons came from the natural world itself. There was a particular willow tree near the river where he often sat in meditation, its branches swaying like a dancer's arms. Over time, he noticed how it never resisted the wind, never stiffened or fought against the storm. It bent, it yielded, and yet it remained unbroken. This became a living metaphor for his philosophy of Wu Wei, effortless action, the art of flowing with circumstances rather than struggling against them. The willow did not need to try to be flexible. It simply was. And in that simplicity lay its strength. Later in life, as his reputation for wisdom grew, seekers began to journey to him, hoping for guidance. Among them was a young man named Chang, earnest but impatient, who once demanded to know the secret of enlightenment. Lao Tzu handed him a cup of tea and told him to drink slowly. The young man gulped it down, barely tasting it. This time, Chang hesitated, then sipped. The old sage smiled. "The first time, you were in a hurry to finish. The second time, you began to notice the warmth, the flavor. What changed? Not the tea. It was in such simple exchanges that Lao Tzu's teaching lived, not as abstract concepts, but as lived experience, passed gently from one heart to another. Perhaps the most mysterious of all his influences was the legendary encounter with Confucius, a meeting shrouded in the mist of time. The two men could not have been more different, one advocating strict social order, the other whispering of the way beyond rules. Yet when they met, it is said that Confucius, usually so confident, left the conversation in deep contemplation. Lao Tzu had not argued with him, had not tried to convince him, a question that dissolved the scaffolding of logic and pointed toward something wordless. Confucius later told his disciples that Lao Tzu was like a dragon, impossible to grasp, riding the winds of mystery in his final years as he prepared to leave civilization behind and journey into the mountains. His students gathered around him, begging for one last teaching. He looked at them with kindness, then picked up a stick and drew a circle in the dirt. He asked. They frowned, searching for an answer. He smiled and wiped the circle away. Exactly, he said. And with that, he turned and walked into the mist, leaving behind not doctrines to memorize, but a way of seeing, an invitation to notice the spaces between words, the silence beneath sound. As we reflect on these relationships, we might feel how they unfold like the petals of a flower, each layer revealing another shade of understanding. The grandfather's quiet presence, the archivist's riddles, the willow's effortless grace, none of them imposed wisdom upon Lao Tzu, but each left a trace, like ripples in a pond, and just as he learned from them, we too can learn from him, not by grasping at knowledge, but by allowing it to settle into us like moonlight on still water. The night deepens now, and with it comes a sense of spaciousness, as if all these stories are merging into the quiet hum of existence. Lao Tzu's life reminds us that wisdom is not seized, but received through patient attention, through the unspoken lessons of those who move through the world with grace. And as sleep draws near, perhaps we can rest in the same trust that understanding comes not by force, but by letting go, like a leaf carried gently downstream by the river of time. Let your mind float with these gentle recollections as we move forward in our story. Long before Lao Tzu became the sage who wandered into the mist, before his words settled like dew upon the hearts of those who listened, he was a young man stepping quietly into the world of courtly duties and administrative responsibilities in the early days of the Zhou dynasty, when the empire was still finding its rhythm. He took his first official post as a keeper of the imperial archives. The halls where he worked were lined with bamboo scrolls, their delicate surfaces covered in the careful strokes of scribes who had come before him. The air carried the scent of aged parchment and ink, a quiet perfume that lingered in the stillness of the archives, where time seemed to move more slowly, like a deep, unhurried breath. His days were filled with the meticulous work of preserving records, organizing edicts, and sometimes transcribing the words of kings and ministers. It was not a glamorous position, but it suited him, the quiet, the order, the way each scroll held a fragment of the past, waiting to be understood. He worked alongside other archivists, men who had spent their lives surrounded by words. And though they were learned, few of them paused to consider the space between those words, the silence that gave them meaning. Lao Tzu, even then, noticed. He would sometimes sit back from his work, letting his fingers rest on the edge of a scroll, his gaze drifting to the courtyard outside, where the wind played with fallen leaves. The challenges he faced were subtle, like the way the ink sometimes bled into the bamboo, obscuring characters, or the occasional impatience of ministers who demanded records before they were ready. But these were small things, easily weathered by his quiet nature. The greater difficulty lay in the expectations of the court, its rigid structures, its insistence on hierarchy and control. He saw how the pursuit of power often led men to forget the deeper rhythms of life, how they strained against the natural order, as if they could bend the world to their will. Even then, he sensed there was another way, though he did not yet have the words for it. One of the few who understood his temperament was an older archivist named Master Quan, a man with a beard like wisps of smoke and eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. He had spent decades among the scrolls, and though he rarely spoke at length, when he did, his words carried weight. On quiet afternoons, when the others had retired to their quarters, Master Quan would sometimes invite Lao Tzu to share tea in the garden. They would sit beneath a persimmon tree, its branches heavy with fruit, and talk of the patterns they observed in history, how dynasties rose and fell, how the wise rulers were those who moved with the current rather than against it. The river does not argue, Master Quan once said, stirring his tea slowly. It simply flows. Lao Tzu listened, turning the thought over in his mind like a smooth pebble in his palm. These conversations became a quiet foundation for his later teachings, though at the time, they were simply moments of shared understanding, like lanterns glowing softly in the dusk. As the years passed, his reputation grew not for ambition or forceful speech, but for his ability to listen, to see beyond the immediate demands of the court. Ministers would sometimes seek his counsel, not because he offered grand solutions, but because he had a way of untangling problems by revealing their simplest form. Once, when a dispute arose over land rights between two noble families, he was called to mediate. Instead of reciting laws or precedents, he asked both parties to walk with him to a nearby stream. There he pointed to the water, how it moved around rocks without resistance. The stream does not fight for its path, he said. The nobles fell silent, and in time, they reached an agreement without further strife. These small but meaningful contributions began to shape his role in the court. He was not a politician, nor a warrior, nor even a philosopher in the traditional sense. He was something quieter, a reminder that wisdom often whispers rather than shouts, that the most enduring truths are those that emerge naturally, like green shoots breaking through the earth in spring. The historical context of his time was one of shifting power and growing unrest. The Zhou dynasty, once strong, was beginning to show signs of decay. Lords vied for influence, and the common people bore the weight of their conflicts. Lao Tzu witnessed this fragmentation, the way the empire's harmony was unraveling like a frayed thread. And yet, in the midst of this, he continued his work, preserving records, observing, waiting. He did not rush to proclaim solutions or rally others to a cause. Instead, he deepened his understanding, like a tree sinking its roots into the earth, drawing nourishment from unseen sources. In those early years, he also encountered travelers, scholars, mystics, and wandering healers who passed through the capital. Some brought stories from distant lands, tales of hermits who lived in mountain caves, or healers who spoke of balancing the energies of the body. These encounters were fleeting, like the brush of a breeze against his cheek, but they left impressions, subtle influences that would later weave into his own thoughts. One evening, a traveling monk shared a parable about a bowl, how it was only useful because of its emptiness. Lao Tzu turned the idea over in his mind for days, letting it settle like sediment in a still pond. And so his early career unfolded, not with dramatic events or sudden revelations, but with quiet observations, small moments of insight, and the patient accumulation of understanding. He was not yet the Lao Tzu of legend, the sage who would one day write the Tao Te Ching asterisk. He was simply a man doing his work, listening to the world, and allowing wisdom to come to him in its own time. Perhaps this is the most soothing lesson of all, that even the greatest of teachers began as students. That wisdom is not seized in a single moment, but gathered slowly, like moonlight pooling in a valley over countless nights. And as we drift towards sleep, we might imagine him there, in the hushed halls of the archives, a young man with ink-stained fingers and a mind open to the quiet voice of the Tao, already beginning his journey, one gentle step at a time, drifting like clouds across the evening sky. We now move to the next part of this calming life story. The years passed gently for Lao Tzu, like leaves falling one by one from an ancient tree. His days in the royal archives were filled with quiet contemplation, the rustle of bamboo scrolls, and the soft whisper of ink on parchment. Yet somewhere within him, a deeper understanding was taking shape, not through force or struggle, but as naturally as water finding its way down a mountainside. It was in these unhurried moments, perhaps while watching the way a river bends without resistance, or noticing how a blade of grass yields to the wind, that his thoughts began to crystallize into something profound. His greatest work, the Tao Te Ching asterisk, did not come in a single burst of inspiration, but emerged slowly, like the turning of the seasons. Legend tells us that when he grew weary of the world's noise and sought the solitude of the western mountains, a gatekeeper named Yin as I recognized the wisdom in him and implored him to leave behind his teachings before departing. And so, with the same unhurried grace that had always guided him, Lao Tzu composed 81 short verses, each one a drop of clarity in an endless ocean. The Tao Te Ching asterisk is not a loud proclamation, but a whisper, one that carries across centuries. Its verses speak of the Tao, the nameless, flowing way of all things. It teaches that true strength lies in softness, that the highest wisdom comes from simplicity, and that the greatest leaders are those who act without force, like water shaping stone over ages. Its words are sparse, yet they contain multitudes, like a single dewdrop reflecting the whole sky. Consider the way he wrote of water, soft, yielding, yet capable of wearing away the hardest rock. This was not merely an observation, but a way of living. He saw in nature the patterns of harmony, how trees bend in the wind, but do not break, how valleys remain low, yet become filled with rivers, how the moon waxes and wanes without haste. His teachings echoed these rhythms, inviting readers to move through life without struggle, to embrace the natural flow rather than fight against it. His methods were as gentle as his words. He did not argue or debate, nor did he seek followers. Instead, he offered his wisdom like a quiet stream, allowing those who were ready to drink from it. His philosophy was not built on rigid rules, but on intuition, on the understanding that each person must find their own way, just as each river finds its own path to the sea. He spoke of asterisk, Wu, why asterisk, effortless action, the art of doing by not forcing, like a farmer who plants seeds and trusts the earth to bring forth life. The impact of his work unfolded as slowly as the opening of a lotus. In his own time, he may have been just another wise voice among many. But over centuries, his words spread like ripples in a pond, influencing emperors and peasants, warriors and poets. His ideas became the foundation of Taoism, a philosophy and later, a religion that embraced harmony with nature, simplicity, and the cultivation of inner stillness. Even those who never read the Tao Te Ching have felt its echoes in the quiet beauty of a Zen garden, in the practice of Tai Chi's flowing movements, in the art of finding peace by letting go. What makes Lao Tzu's teachings so enduring is their softness, their lack of demands. He did not ask for blind faith or rigid obedience. Instead, he invited reflection, a turning inward to observe the quiet wisdom that already resides within. His words are not commandments, but gentle reminders, like the sound of wind through bamboo, or the distant call of a bird at dusk. And so, as we rest here, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, we might imagine him not as a distant sage, but as a man who walked the same earth we do, who noticed the same moon, who felt the same breeze. His greatness lay not in grand gestures, but in the quiet accumulation of small insights, in the patience to listen, and the courage to embrace the unknown without fear. His legacy is not a monument, but a whisper, one that still lingers in the air, waiting for anyone who pauses long enough to hear. Perhaps, as sleep draws nearer, we can take comfort in his most soothing lesson of all, that the universe moves in its own time, that we need not rush or strive, but simply allow ourselves to be carried, like a leaf on a gentle stream, trusting that the Tao will guide us in its own perfect way. As your breathing becomes more regular, let us continue with the next chapter of our biography. The life of Lao Tzu, like the winding path of a quiet river, was shaped by moments of stillness and subtle turns, each one guiding him deeper into the heart of wisdom. Though history has softened the edges of his story, the turning points that defined him remain like gentle ripples on the surface of a pond, small, yet powerful enough to change the course of everything that followed. One of the earliest and most pivotal moments in his life was his decision to serve as a keeper of the imperial archives in the Zhou dynasty. It was a position of quiet dignity, one that allowed him to immerse himself in the ancient texts and observe the workings of the world from a place of contemplation. Day after day, he would sit among the scrolls, his fingers tracing the wisdom of those who came before, his mind absorbing the patterns of nature and human folly. Had he chosen a different path, perhaps one of ambition, like the many officials who sought power and influence, his teachings might have been lost in the noise of politics and struggle. But by choosing stillness, by choosing the company of silence and ink, he cultivated the deep awareness that would later flow through his words like water over smooth stones. Then came the moment when he decided to leave it all behind. The empire was crumbling, its rulers growing deaf to wisdom, and Lao Tzu felt the weight of futility pressing upon him. Some say it was sorrow that moved him. Others say it was simply the natural unfolding of his journey. Whatever the reason, he mounted his ox and rode toward the western pass, where the border guard, recognizing his wisdom, begged him not to depart without leaving some trace of his insight. In that quiet exchange beneath the vast sky, Lao Tzu paused. He could have ridden on, disappearing into legend without a word. But instead, he took up the brush and wrote the verses that would become the Tao Te Ching, a gift not just for the guard, but for all who would listen. Had he chosen silence, the world might never have heard his voice. But in that moment of generosity, he left behind a whisper that would echo through centuries. The writing itself was another turning point, not because it was forced or deliberate, but because it emerged effortlessly, like breath leaving the body. Unlike the rigid doctrines of his time, his words were soft, fluid, unbound by strict rules or demands. He did not seek to impose, only to suggest, to point toward the way things are, rather than how they should be. Had he tried to structure his teachings into a rigid system, his philosophy might have become just another school of thought, debated, and then forgotten. But because he spoke in paradoxes, in poetry, in images that shimmer like moonlight on water. His wisdom remained open, inviting each generation to find its own meaning within his words. Later, as his fame grew, there came another quiet decision, one of withdrawal. Some say he vanished into the mountains, others that he wandered like a hermit, dissolving into the landscape he so often spoke of. He could have stayed, could have built a school, gathered disciples, shaped his teachings into an institution. But he chose instead to let go, to become like the uncarved block, pure potential, undefined. In doing so, he ensured that his wisdom would never be confined by dogma, never rigidified into something that could be owned or controlled. Had he stayed, his teachings might have been hardened into doctrine, losing the very flexibility that makes them so enduring. But by stepping away, he allowed them to remain fluid, like the Tao itself, always moving, always changing, yet always the same. And then there is the question of his meeting with Confucius, a moment shrouded in legend. The two great sages stood at opposite ends of thought, one speaking of order and ritual, the other of yielding and simplicity. Some say Lao Tzu gently rebuked Confucius for his rigid ways, others that they parted with mutual respect. Whatever the truth, the encounter was a quiet reminder that wisdom wears many faces, and that even the most profound minds can walk different paths. Had Lao Tzu sought to argue, to prove his way superior, his teachings might have become just another voice in a chorus of debate. But by listening, by responding without force, he embodied the very principle of Wu Wei, effortless action, showing that true wisdom does not clash, but flows around obstacles like water. In the end, the greatest turning point in Lao Tzu's life may have been his choice to embrace uncertainty, to trust the unseen current that carries all things. He did not resist change, did not cling to permanence. Even his departure from the world was soft, without fanfare, as if he were simply stepping into the next natural phase of existence. Had he fought against the flow? Had he tried to leave behind a legacy of stone and scripture rather than whispers and wind? His teachings might have faded like so many others, but because he moved with the Tao, because he trusted the way of things, his words remain alive, still breathing, still guiding those who listen in the quiet hours. And so, as we drift toward sleep, we might imagine these moments not as dramatic forks in the road, but as gentle bends in a river, each one taking him deeper into the heart of what it means to be at peace. What if he had stayed in the archives, never writing? What if he had argued with Confucius, or built a school, or tried to force his wisdom upon the world? The answers matter less than the truth he himself taught, that life unfolds as it should, that the path is made by walking, and that sometimes the most profound choices are the ones made without struggle, in the quiet certainty that all things return to the source in their own time. As sleep draws near, let us take comfort in this thought, that even the greatest lives are shaped by small, quiet decisions, by moments of surrender rather than force. Lao Tzu's legacy is not in the grand events, but in the soft spaces between them, in the breath between words, in the stillness that follows a thought. And perhaps in our own lives, the most important turning points are not the ones we plan or demand, but the ones we allow, like the turning of leaves in the wind, or the slow, inevitable drift of clouds across the moon. The calming story continues as we gently examine what happened next in this remarkable journey. Lao Tzu's life, like the quiet course of a river, was shaped not only by solitude, but by the gentle currents of connection, those who walked beside him. Even if only for a short while, his relationships were never loud or demanding, but they left ripples in the waters of his wisdom, subtle yet enduring. There was his mother, a woman of few words but deep presence. She moved through their home with the same effortless grace Lao Tzu would later come to revere in nature. She did not teach him through lectures, but through the way she tended to the garden, the way she paused to watch the rain, the way she accepted both joy and sorrow without resistance. From her, he learned that wisdom could be found in silence, in the unspoken understanding that life unfolds as it must. When she passed, it was not with dramatic lamentation, but with a quiet exhale, as if she were simply returning to the earth that had nourished her. Lao Tzu carried her memory not as a weight, but as a breath, always present, always light. In the imperial archives, where he spent so many years among scrolls and silence, there were colleagues who came and went like shadows. Most were preoccupied with rank and recognition, but one, a man named Wen, shared Lao Tzu's love for the spaces between words. They would sit together in the dim light of the archives, not speaking for hours, yet understanding one another perfectly. Wen was the one who first noticed Lao Tzu's habit of leaving small gaps in his writing, pauses where the reader might rest, where meaning could settle like dust. Their friendship was like that unspoken, unhurried, a companionship of shared stillness. When Wen left the archives to follow his own path, there was no farewell, only a nod, as if they both knew they would meet again in the way all things do in the turning of the Tao. Then there was the encounter with Confucius, a meeting that could have been a clash of philosophies, but instead became a lesson in harmony. Confucius, earnest and precise, sought answers with the urgency of a man building a ladder to heaven. Lao Tzu, by contrast, sat like a stone in a river, letting the questions flow around him. They spoke late into the night, and though their words were different, there was a mutual respect, a recognition that both were pointing toward the same truth, even if from opposite banks of the river. And in that moment, something softened in Confucius, not surrender, but a widening of understanding. Years later, Confucius would speak of Lao Tzu with reverence, calling him a dragon among men, elusive and profound. Their connection was brief, but it left a mark on both, a reminder that wisdom wears many faces. Lao Tzu's relationships with women were few, but deep. There was a healer named Li, who lived on the edge of the forest and knew the secrets of herbs and roots. She moved through the world with the same fluidity he admired in water, bending but never breaking. They were never bound by the titles of husband and wife, but there was a tenderness between them, an unspoken devotion. She taught him that healing was not about forcing the body to obey, but about aligning with its natural rhythms. In her presence, he learned that listening, truly listening, was the highest form of wisdom. Years later, when she passed into the next life, he did not mourn in the conventional sense. Instead, he sat by her favorite stream and let the sound of the water carry his gratitude. Perhaps the most transformative relationship was the one he had with his own disciples, though he would never have called them that. They were simply travelers who walked beside him for a time, drawn by the quiet gravity of his presence. One young man, a restless seeker named Yan, followed him for months, always asking for answers, always impatient. Lao Tzu never refused him, but neither did he give him what he demanded. Instead, he would point to the way the bamboo bent in the wind, or the way the river smoothed the sharpest stones. Lao Tzu replied, "I have been telling you all along." Something in Yan broke open then, not with pain, but with release. He sat down by the roadside and wept, not out of sorrow, but from the sudden understanding that the answers had been inside him all along. Years later, Yan would say that moment was the true beginning of his path. And then there was the gatekeeper, Yin Sai, the man who would become the keeper of Lao Tzu's words. When Lao Tzu decided to leave the world behind, to vanish into the mountains, it was Yin Sai who recognized him, who asked for his teaching before he departed. Lao Tzu might have refused. He might have slipped away without a trace. But something in the gatekeeper's earnestness, in his willingness to listen without demand, moved him. And so, in those final days, he wrote the Tao Te Ching not as a monument to himself, but as a gift to one who was ready to receive it. Yin Sai did not cling to the words as dogma. He understood that they were meant to be lived, not worshipped. Their relationship lasted only a brief while, yet it changed the course of history. For it was through Yin Sai that Lao Tzu's wisdom found its way into the world. In the end, Lao Tzu's connections were like the brush strokes of a fading ink painting, delicate, fleeting, yet leaving behind something timeless. He did not cling to any of them, did not try to make them permanent. He understood that all relationships, like all things, have their season. Some are meant to last a lifetime, others only a moment. But each one leaves its mark, shaping us as the river shapes the stone, not by force, but by patient, gentle persistence. As sleep gathers around you now, imagine these bonds not as chains, but as threads of light, appearing and disappearing like fireflies in the dusk. They do not weigh him down, but lift him, just as your own connections, past, present, and future, are lifting you. Even now, ways you may not yet see, and in that knowing, there is peace, as soft and certain as the turning of the earth beneath you, as the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort as we explore the next phase of this soothing biography. Lao Tzu's days unfolded like the petals of a lotus, slow, unhurried, each moment given its own quiet space to breathe. He did not rush through life, nor did he cling to it. Instead, he moved through the world as water moves through a stream, gently, without resistance. His home was simple, a place where the wind could whisper through the cracks in the wood, where sunlight pooled in golden puddles on the earthen floor. He needed little, for he had long understood that true richness lay not in possessions, but in the stillness between thoughts, in the way the morning mist curled around the mountains before dissolving into the sky. In the earliest hours, before the world had fully woken, Lao Tzu would rise, not because he forced himself to, but because his body knew its own rhythm. As natural as the tide, he would step outside, bare feet pressing into the cool earth, and simply stand there, breathing in the quiet. The air smelled of dew and distant pine, and sometimes, if he listened closely, he could hear the faint rustle of a fox moving through the underbrush. These moments were his communion, a silent conversation with the world that required no words. Afterwards, he would prepare tea, not as a ritual, but as an act of presence. The fire crackled softly beneath the pot, the water humming as it warmed. He watched the leaves unfurl, their fragrance rising like a sigh. There was no hurry in this, no need to do anything but be. Sometimes, if the morning was particularly still, he would sit for a long while after drinking, the empty cup resting in his palms, his mind as clear as the sky. His days were often spent wandering, not with any destination in mind, but simply to feel the earth beneath him, to notice the way the light shifted through the trees. He walked without purpose, and in that purposelessness, he found a kind of deep belonging. The forest knew him. The birds did not startle at his approach. Occasionally, he would stop to watch a spider spinning its web, the delicate threads glistening with morning dew. There was wisdom in such things, if one knew how to look. When he returned, he might take up his brush, dipping it into ink that was black as night. He did not write to be remembered, nor even to teach. He wrote because the words flowed through him, like water finding its way down a mountainside. Each stroke was an act of surrender, not of control. Sometimes the characters came out crooked, uneven, and he would smile at their imperfection. Life, too, was crooked and uneven, and that was its beauty. Though he was often alone, he was never lonely. People came to him, drawn by something they could not name, a quietude perhaps, a sense that here was a man who did not grasp or demand. Some stayed for an hour, some for a season. A mother once brought her child, a boy with wide, curious eyes, and Lao Tzu had simply sat with him in silence, watching a caterpillar inch its way along a branch. No lessons were given, no grand truths imparted, yet years later, the boy, now grown, would speak of that afternoon as the moment he first understood patience. There was an old woman in the village who brought him sweet plums in the summer. Their skins warm from the sun. She never asked for anything in return, and he never offered. Their exchange was wordless, a mutual recognition that kindness needs no reason. When she passed away one winter, he did not mourn in the way others did. He sat by the river instead, watching the ice melt at its edges, knowing she was still part of the great unfolding, just in another form. Music, too, found its way into his life. Though he did not play an instrument, he would sometimes pause in his walks to listen to the wind moving through the bamboo. A sound so soft it was almost a thought. Or the distant song of a woodcutter returning home, his voice rising and falling like the hills themselves. Lao Tzu did not try to capture these moments, to hold them still. He let them pass through him, as light passes through water. In the evenings, he would often sit outside, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night sky was his oldest companion, unchanging in its changeability. Some nights, he would trace the constellations with his finger, not because he believed they held answers, but because the act itself was a kind of reverence. Other nights, he would close his eyes and simply listen to the crickets, to the distant hush of the river, to the sound of his own breath, steady as a heartbeat. He slept when he was tired, ate when he was hungry. There was no schedule to his life, only the gentle pulse of necessity. His bed was a simple mat, his blanket woven from coarse wool. Yet he never felt the lack of luxury, for he had long since ceased to measure comfort in such terms. True rest, he knew, came not from the softness of the bed, but from the softness of the mind. And so his days unfolded, one into the next, like the turning of pages in a book written by the earth itself. He did not seek to leave a mark, yet his presence, so quiet, so unassuming, lingered in the hearts of those who crossed his path. Not because he demanded to be remembered, but because he showed them, without a word, how to forget themselves, how to be still, and in that stillness, to find the infinite. As you drift now toward sleep, imagine his life not as something distant, but as something woven into the very fabric of the night. The same stars he watched still shine above you. The same wind that stirred the leaves outside his door now brushes against your window. And the same peace that filled his quiet moments is here, in this room, in the space between one breath and the next. You need not grasp for it. It is already yours. Like a gentle river flowing toward the sea, our story continues with the next meaningful chapter. Lao Tzu's days began not with the clanging of bells or the demands of duty, but with the slow unfurling of consciousness, like mist rising from a river at dawn. There was no hurry in his waking, no jarring start to the morning. Instead, he would let the light seep into his awareness, his breath deepening as the world around him stirred. The first thing he would do upon opening his eyes was simply to listen to the rustling of leaves outside his small dwelling, to the distant murmur of water in the stream, to the faint calls of birds greeting the sun. His home was simple, a humble structure of wood and earth, its walls lined with woven bamboo, its roof thatched with reeds. There was no door to shut out the world, only a curtain of straw that swayed with the breeze, letting in the scent of damp earth and morning dew. When he rose, it was with the ease of a man who had long ceased to struggle against gravity. His movements were fluid, unhurried, as though each step were in agreement with the earth beneath him. He would dip his hands in a basin of cool water, the surface shimmering with the reflection of his face, wrinkled yet serene, like the bark of an ancient tree. His morning meal was as simple as his surroundings, a bowl of millet porridge, sometimes flavored with wild herbs gathered from the hillside, or a handful of dried plums, their sweetness lingering on his tongue. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were the first and the last, his mind quiet, free from distraction. After eating, he would often walk, not as a man with a destination, but as one who moved for the sake of movement, for the pleasure of feeling the earth beneath his bare feet. His path meandered, sometimes leading him through stands of bamboo, their tall stalks whispering secrets to the wind, or along the banks of a quiet stream where the water murmured over smooth stones. He carried nothing with him, no staff, no satchel, only the weightless presence of his own being. And as he walked, he would sometimes pause, not because he was tired, but because the world demanded his stillness. A butterfly alighting on a leaf, the ripple of a fish beneath the water's surface. These small wonders were enough to root him to the spot, his breath slowing until it matched the rhythm of the land around him. By midday, the sun would hang heavy in the sky, casting dappled shadows through the trees. If the heat grew too strong, he might seek the shade of an old oak, its gnarled roots cradling him like the arms of an elder. Here, he would sometimes sit for hours, not in meditation as some might think, but in simple being. His eyes half closed, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He would let the world pass through him, the hum of insects, the distant call of a cuckoo, the scent of pine resin warming in the sun. There was no effort in his stillness, only a deep and abiding surrender to the moment. If visitors came, and sometimes they did, drawn by the quiet magnetism of his presence, he would welcome them without ceremony. They might find him seated beneath the oak, or kneeling by the stream, cupping water in his palms to drink. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were like stones dropped into a still pond, rippling outward in quiet revelation. Some sought wisdom, others simply solace, and he gave both without distinction, for he knew they were one and the same. His teachings were not lectures, but questions, gentle nudges toward the truth that already lived within those who listened. As the afternoon waned, he might return to his dwelling, though often he lingered outdoors until the last light faded. His evening meal was as sparse as the morning's, perhaps a bowl of steamed greens, a handful of nuts, or a piece of coarse bread dipped in honey. He ate with the same mindfulness, his movements deliberate, his attention never wandering far from the act of nourishment. After eating, he would sometimes sit by the hearth, if the night was cool, watching the flames dance in their slow, hypnotic rhythm. The fire needed no instruction. It knew its own way, just as he knew his. When sleep came, it came softly, like a tide creeping up the shore. He did not fight it, nor did he chase it. He simply let it take him when it would, lying on his woven mat, the coarse wool blanket pulled loosely over his shoulders. The night sounds, the chirrup of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl lulled him deeper into rest. His dreams, if he dreamed at all, were not stories, but sensations. The cool touch of moonlight on his skin, the weightless drift of a leaf on the wind. And so his days passed, each one a thread in the seamless fabric of his life. There was no division between work and leisure, between sacred and mundane. Everything was as it was, and in that acceptance, he found the deepest peace. His tools were few: a wooden bowl, a clay cup, a knife for cutting herbs. But they were enough. His world was small, yet within it, he touched the infinite. As you listen to these words, let them carry you as the stream carried Lao Tzu's reflections. Gently, effortlessly, feel the weight of your own body sinking into the surface beneath you, as he sank into the earth each night. There is no need to strive, no need to grasp. The same quiet that filled his days is here, now, in the slowing of your breath, in the space between thoughts. Let it hold you as the night holds the stars, and sleep will come as naturally as the turning of the seasons. As your thoughts grow quieter, we'll continue our peaceful exploration of this fascinating life. Lao Tzu's philosophy was like the quiet flow of a river, never forced, never hurried, yet always moving in harmony with the earth. He did not arrive at his wisdom through grand revelations or sudden epiphanies, but through the slow, patient observation of nature and the rhythms of life. He watched how water, though soft and yielding, could carve canyons from stone. He noticed how the tallest trees bent in the wind, while the rigid ones snapped. From these simple truths, he understood that there was a deeper way of being, one of softness, acceptance, and effortless action. At the heart of his thinking was the concept of the Tao, the way. The Tao was not something to be defined or explained, only experienced. It was the nameless source of all things, the invisible current beneath existence. To follow the Tao was to move like water, to act without forcing, to live without grasping. He once wrote, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao." Words, he knew, could only point toward the truth, never fully capture it, and so he spoke in paradoxes, in gentle riddles that invited stillness rather than analysis. His philosophy was one of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, though it was never about laziness or passivity. Wu Wei was the art of aligning oneself with the natural order, like a farmer who plants seeds and waits for rain, trusting the earth to do its work. He saw how people exhausted themselves chasing desires, struggling against the current of life, and he offered another way. He valued simplicity above all else. In a world where men sought wealth, power, and status, he saw these pursuits as chains that weighed down the spirit. He lived with little, a simple hut, a few possessions, yet felt no lack. He who knows he has enough is rich, he murmured to those who would listen. His needs were few because his contentment was deep. He did not measure his life by what he owned, but by the quiet joy he found in watching the sunrise, in feeling the wind on his face, in the taste of clear water from a mountain spring. His teachings were not commandments or rigid rules, but gentle invitations to return to what was already within. At the center of your being, you have the answer, he said. He believed that wisdom was not something to be acquired, but remembered. Beneath the noise of desires and fears, beneath the layers of striving and effort, there was a natural harmony waiting to be rediscovered. He had no interest in debates or intellectual competitions. When scholars came to challenge him, he would often respond with silence or a simple story that left them puzzled. Once, a young man asked him to define virtue. Lao Tzu pointed to a stream and said, "See how the water nourishes all things without demanding anything in return." The young man frowned, expecting a lengthy discourse, but Lao Tzu only smiled and turned away. He saw the world as an ever-changing dance of opposites, light and dark, hard and soft, action and stillness. Yet he knew these were not truly separate, but two sides of the same whole. When people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly, he observed. He did not seek to eliminate difficulty or struggle, but to embrace the natural balance of life. Just as day could not exist without night, joy could not exist without sorrow. The wise person, he believed, did not resist this flow, but moved with it. His later years were spent in even deeper solitude. He wandered the mountains, often disappearing for days at a time, returning only when his few belongings needed mending, or when the village children sought his stories. Some said he spoke less and less, as if words themselves had become unnecessary. His presence alone carried his teaching, a quiet reminder that the deepest truths could not be spoken, only felt. And when the time came for him to leave this world, he did so as gently as he had lived. There were no grand farewells, no final sermons. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he simply walked beyond the edge of the village and did not return. Some say he vanished into the mist of the mountains. Others believe he became one with the Tao, dissolving like a drop of water, returning to the ocean. But his wisdom remained, not as a doctrine to be followed rigidly, but as an echo of the natural way. The sage does not hoard, he had written. The more he does for others, the more he has. These were not just ideas, but reflections of how he had lived, giving without expectation, teaching without imposing, loving without possessing. As you rest now, let his words settle into you like the evening dew on grass. There is no need to cling to them, no need to dissect their meaning. Like the Tao itself, they are here, then gone, leaving only a quiet sense of peace. Feel how your breath rises and falls without effort, how your thoughts come and go like clouds passing over a still lake. This is the way of Lao Tzu, soft, yielding, yet infinitely present, and just as he found stillness in the heart of movement, you too can find rest in the midst of life. There is nothing to achieve, nowhere to go. The Tao is here, in the weight of your body, in the rhythm of your heartbeat, in the silence between these words. Let yourself sink into that silence now, as Lao Tzu sank into the embrace of the earth each night. Sleep comes not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a friend, as natural as the river returning to the sea. Close your eyes and know that all is well. The same quiet wisdom that guided Lao Tzu flows through you now, effortless and eternal. There is nothing to do, nothing to understand, only rest, only peace. The night holds you, just as it held him, and in this gentle darkness, you are home. With each breath becoming slower and deeper, let us turn to another aspect of this soothing story. Lao Tzu's life, like all lives, was not without its struggles. Even the wisest among us must walk through shadows before finding the light. His path was one of quiet perseverance, meeting each obstacle with the same soft strength he so often spoke of, never resisting, never forcing, but yielding like water, patiently carving its way through stone. In the early days of his service, as a keeper of the imperial archives, Lao Tzu faced the weight of bureaucracy, the rigid structures of power that seemed so distant from the natural flow of the Tao. The court was a place of intricate rules, where ambition clashed with wisdom, where words were often twisted for gain rather than truth. He watched as men schemed and struggled, exhausting themselves in pursuit of fleeting honors, and though he was respected for his knowledge, his gentle ways sometimes made him an outsider, a man too soft for the harshness of politics. Yet he did not fight against this. Instead, he observed, like a silent mountain watching the storms below. He learned that force only begets force, that anger only feeds more anger. So he remained still, patient, allowing the currents of human folly to swirl around him without being swept away. In time, those who sought true wisdom would come to him, drawn by his quiet presence, like travelers finding shelter beneath an ancient tree. There were moments when even his patience was tested. Once, a young nobleman, full of pride, came to challenge him, demanding to know why Lao Tzu did not strive for greater influence, why he seemed content to remain in the shadows. The sage listened, his face as calm as a pool in the forest. and then he simply poured a cup of tea, filling it until it overflowed. The young man frowned, confused. He asked. Lao Tzu smiled gently and replied, "Your mind is like this cup too full to receive anything new." The nobleman left in frustration, but years later, he would return, humbled by life's lessons, ready to listen. Another challenge came when the kingdom fell into turmoil, warring factions tearing at the fabric of society. Lao Tzu saw the suffering of the people, the villages burned, the families torn apart. He felt the weight of helplessness, the sorrow of witnessing so much unnecessary pain. And yet, he knew that adding his voice to the clamor of advice would only be another drop in a stormy sea. Instead, he turned inward, seeking the stillness at the center of the chaos. It was during this time that he began to write, not as a call to action, but as an invitation to return to what is simple, to what is essential. His words were not commands, but whispers, gentle reminders that the way of harmony is always present, even in the darkest times. Perhaps the greatest test of all came when he chose to leave the court, to walk away from the world of titles and duties. Some called it defeat, a retreat from responsibility. But for Lao Tzu, it was the deepest act of trust in the unseen flow of life, trust that wisdom does not need to shout to be heard. As he passed through the gates of the city for the last time, the guard recognized him and begged him to leave some record of his teachings. And so, with quiet grace, Lao Tzu paused and wrote the verses that would become the Tao Te Ching, not as a monument to himself, but as a gift for those who might one day need it. Then he continued on his way, disappearing into the mist of the western mountains, leaving behind no grand farewell, no final proclamation, only the enduring presence of his words, like footprints in the sand, slowly fading, but never truly gone. Even in his later years, as legend tells, he faced the quiet struggles of age, the body growing heavier, the steps slower. Yet he met these too with acceptance, seeing them not as enemies, but as part of the great turning of the Tao. He watched the seasons change, the leaves fall and return, and knew that all things move in their own time. There was no need to grasp, no need to fear. The river does not resist the sea. It simply becomes part of something greater. And so, as you rest now, let these stories drift through your mind like leaves on a slow-moving stream. There is no lesson to cling to, no moral to dissect. Just the quiet knowing that even the wisest among us face challenges, and the greatest strength often lies in yielding, in trusting, in letting go. Lao Tzu's life was not one of unbroken ease, but of deep peace, a peace that came not from avoiding hardship, but from moving through it like water, finding the softest path, the gentlest way. May you too meet your own difficulties with such grace, not by fighting, not by fearing, but by resting in the certainty that all things pass, and that within you is the same quiet wisdom that carried Lao Tzu through every storm. The night cradles you now, as it cradled him, and in this stillness there is nothing to solve, nothing to overcome. Only the slow, steady breath, the beating of your heart, the unshakable peace of simply being. Sleep comes not as an end, but as a returning to the source, to the Tao, to the infinite embrace that holds all things. Let go and be carried. The tapestry of this remarkable life unfolds further as we gently explore the next meaningful period, though Lao Tzu is most often remembered as the sage who wrote the Tao Te Ching asterisk and vanished into the western mountains. There were softer, quieter dimensions to his life that rarely appear in the grand retellings of his wisdom. He was not always the serene teacher we imagine. He had moments of doubt, private joys, and even a few peculiar habits that made him all the more human. One of the lesser-known aspects of Lao Tzu was his deep love for the natural world, not just in the abstract sense of contemplating the Tao, but in the simple, tactile pleasure of being among living things. He had a particular fondness for birds, especially the small, unassuming ones that most people overlooked. It was said that he would sit for hours beneath an ancient tree, motionless, until sparrows and finches would alight on his shoulders, pecking at crumbs he had tucked into the folds of his robe. He never spoke of this habit. It was not a lesson, not a metaphor, just a quiet delight he kept to himself. Another surprising detail was his skill as a woodworker. Though he lived simply, he had a small set of carving tools, and in the evenings, when the light was soft and golden, he would shape pieces of driftwood into smooth, flowing forms, curves that mimicked the lines of rivers or the gentle slope of hills. He never sold these carvings, never even showed them to many people. They were not meant to be art, not in the way we think of it now. They were just his hands moving in harmony with the wood, a meditation without words. He also had a peculiar sense of humor, one that rarely made it into the solemn retellings of his teachings. Once, when a particularly self-important scholar came to him demanding the secret to immortality, Lao Tzu listened patiently, nodded, and then handed the man an empty cup. The scholar, bewildered, stared into the cup. "But there's nothing in it," he protested. Lao Tzu only smiled. The man left in frustration, never realizing he had just been given the very lesson he sought: emptiness, the absence of striving, the way of non-doing. There were days, too, when Lao Tzu did not feel wise at all. He would wander away from the village, climbing higher into the hills, until he found a secluded spot where he could sit and simply breathe. Some say that on these days, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the world, the sorrow of seeing people struggle against the natural flow of things. He did not always have answers. Sometimes he just let the wind dry his tears, and then there were the small, private rituals that marked his days. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, he would pour a cup of water onto the earth, not as an offering to any god, but as a reminder to himself that nourishment must always return to its source. In the evenings, he would hum softly, a wordless tune that rose and fell like a slow river. No one knows if it was a song he had learned or one he made up as he went along. Perhaps it did not matter, even his famed departure, riding a water buffalo into the mountains, never to be seen again, was not quite as solemn as later stories made it seem. Those who knew him said that in his final days in the village, he had been lighter, almost playful. He gave away his few possessions with a chuckle, as if the act of releasing them was itself a kind of joy. And when the time came to leave, he did not make a grand speech. He simply patted the buffalo's neck, smiled at those who had gathered, and said, "Well then, these small, forgotten details do not diminish his wisdom. If anything, they deepen it. They remind us that even the greatest sages were human. That wisdom is not the absence of doubt or sorrow, but the ability to move through them with grace, with curiosity, even with laughter. And so, as sleep draws near, let these quiet truths settle into your mind like soft rain into thirsty earth. There is no need to remember them, no need to grasp. They are simply here, like the stories of an old friend, told in whispers by the fading light. The night holds you as it once held him. Breathe and rest. As you settle more comfortably, our narrative flows onward like soft moonlight across still waters in the quiet valleys of ancient China, where mist curled around mountain peaks like the breath of the earth itself. A world was unfolding that would shape the thoughts of a sage named Lao Tzu. It was the Zhou dynasty, a time of both stability and slow decay, where the rituals of kings and the whispers of philosophers mingled with the rustling of bamboo leaves. The year was likely somewhere in the 6th century BCE, though time, like water, flows softly around such figures, blurring the edges of history into myth. China then was not the vast, unified empire it would later become, but a patchwork of states, each with its own rulers, its own customs, bound together by the fragile thread of Zhou authority. The Zhou kings, once powerful, had seen their influence wane, their court reduced to little more than a ceremonial shadow. Yet, even as the political order fractured, the land remained steeped in tradition, rituals honoring ancestors, offerings to heaven and earth, the belief that harmony between ruler and cosmos was the foundation of all things. It was in this world that Lao Tzu walked, a keeper of archives, a quiet observer of the crumbling certainties around him. The air was thick with change, though few could name it. Wars between states flared like brief sparks in the night. Scholars debated the nature of virtue, the meaning of order, while farmers tilled the same soil their ancestors had, guided by the turning seasons. The land itself seemed to whisper of something deeper, something beyond the strife of kings and the clamor of human ambition. Far to the west, beyond the mountains and deserts Lao Tzu would never see, other great minds were stirring. In India, the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, finding his own path beyond suffering. In Greece, Pythagoras pondered the music of the spheres, while in Persia, Zoroaster spoke of light and darkness. The world, though vast and unknown to its people, was humming with a quiet awakening, as if the earth itself were dreaming new ways of understanding. But Lao Tzu's gaze turned inward to the patterns of nature, the way water flows without striving, the way trees bend in the wind but do not break. He saw the folly in rigid rules, in the endless grasping for power and control. The Joe rituals, once meant to align heaven and earth, had become hollow, performed out of duty rather than true reverence. And so he began to speak, not in grand proclamations, but in riddles, in paradoxes, in words that slipped like mist through the fingers of those who tried too hard to hold them. The world he knew was one of contrasts. On one hand, the beauty of the natural order, the unfurling of a lotus, the effortless flight of a heron. On the other, the grinding machinery of human ambition, taxes, laws, armies marching under banners of kings who claimed mandate from heaven. Lao Tzu did not rage against these things, but neither did he bow to them. Instead, he offered another way, a path of yielding, of softness, of returning to the uncarved block. The state before names and divisions clouded the mind. As you drift now, imagine the slow turning of those days, the way sunlight filtered through the mulberry trees, the murmur of a stream that had carved its path over centuries, the great events of history, battles, edicts, the rise and fall of dynasties fade like echoes, while the deeper truths remain, patient as the earth itself. Lao Tzu's wisdom did not spring from emptiness, but from the world around him, from the cycles of growth and decay. He observed in all things. The farmers knew, without being taught, that seeds must fall into darkness before they can rise toward the light. The potter knew that clay must be soft to take shape. The weaver that tension must be balanced with slack. These were not philosophies written in books, but truths lived every day by hands that moved in rhythm with the way of things. And then there was Confucius, another seeker of order, but one who looked to human relationships, to duty and hierarchy, to the careful arrangement of society, like tiles in a mosaic. Legends say the two met, these giants of thought, one who spoke of rules and roles, the other who smiled and spoke of the unspoken, the unnamed. Perhaps they parted as friends, perhaps as strangers, each carrying a piece of the other's questions into the quiet of their own contemplation. The years rolled on as years do, and Lao Tzu grew weary of the world's noise. It is said that he mounted a water buffalo and rode westward toward the mountains, leaving behind the court, the scholars, the endless debates. At the gates, a keeper of the pass begged him to write down his wisdom before he vanished into the mist. And so, in a handful of verses, he gave us the Tao Te Ching, a book that weighs less than a sparrow's wing, but holds the weight of rivers, of mountains, of the turning stars. Then he was gone. Whether he faded into legend into the embrace of the valleys he loved, or simply walked on until his footprints disappeared in the rain. No one can say, but his words remained, not as chains to bind the mind, but as a mirror held up to the way things are, the way water wears away stone not by force, but by persistence, by surrender. As sleep draws near, let these thoughts soften like shadows at dusk. There is no need to untangle them, no need to force understanding. The same currents that carried Lao Tzu's words through time now carry you, gently, toward rest. The night is vast, as it was then, and the same stars that watched over the sage now watch over you. Breathe and let go. The way is open, as it always has been. Let the rhythm of these words carry you further into relaxation as we continue our peaceful journey. Lao Tzu's words did not crash into the world like a storm, nor did they blaze like wildfire. They arrived as softly as morning mist, settling into the cracks of human thought, seeping into philosophies, arts, and ways of living over centuries. His teachings in the Tao Te Ching asterisk became not just a text, but a way of seeing, an invitation to flow with the world rather than resist it. And though he himself vanished into legend, his influence remained quiet but persistent, like the turning of seasons or the slow growth of roots beneath the earth. In the centuries that followed his departure, scholars and seekers returned to his verses again and again, finding in them not rigid doctrine, but an open hand. The Tao was not a path to be conquered, but a current to be trusted. In China, his ideas wove into the fabric of thought, blending with Confucianism and later Buddhism, shaping a culture that valued harmony with nature, humility in leadership, and the wisdom of yielding. Emperors and generals, poets and farmers, all found something in his words. Rulers who embraced the Tao learned that the best governance was often the lightest touch, like a breeze that guides without force. Artists painted landscapes where mountains rose and rivers curled with the same effortless grace Lao Tzu described. Even in conflict, his teachings whispered that the softest things, water, grass, the patient earth, outlast the hardest. Beyond China's borders, his words traveled slowly, carried by monks and merchants, scholars and storytellers. By the time the West began to translate his work in the 19th century, the Tao Te Ching asterisk was already ancient, yet its message felt strangely fresh. Here was a philosophy that did not demand struggle or domination, but instead spoke of ease, of aligning with the natural order. To minds weary of industrial clamor and rigid hierarchies, Lao Tzu's voice was a balm. Philosophers like Schopenhauer and Jung found echoes of his thought in their own. B. Yeats and Ursula K. Le Guin wove his ideas into their verses, sensing in them a timeless rhythm. Even now, in a world that races forward, Lao Tzu's presence lingers. You can hear him in the quiet corners of modern life, in the mindfulness movement, where letting go is valued as much as striving, in environmentalism, which which speaks of living gently upon the earth. In leadership theories that prize humility over arrogance, his words remind us that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is the river that carves canyons without a sound. The reception of his work has shifted like the Tao itself, sometimes embraced, sometimes forgotten, but never truly lost. In dynastic China, his teachings were both revered and debated, with some seeing them as a retreat from responsibility, others as the deepest form of wisdom. In the West, early translators struggled to capture the fluidity of his language, often rendering his poetry into stiff, philosophical terms. But over time, new interpretations arose, each one a little softer, a little closer to the original spirit. Scholars now understand that the Tao Te Ching asterisk was never meant to be dissected like a textbook, but felt like music or tasted like clear water. Public perception of Lao Tzu has softened too. Once seen as a distant sage, shrouded in myth, he has become a companion to many, a voice that speaks not from a pedestal, but from the quiet spaces between thoughts. Modern readers find in his words a remedy for the noise of life, a reminder that the heart does not need to be loud to be heard. His image, often depicted as an old man riding a buffalo, has become a symbol of gentle wisdom, of moving through the world without haste or force. His cultural footprint is not marked by monuments or institutions, but by something subtler, a way of thinking that has seeped into the subconscious of the world. Even in science, his ideas find resonance, with physicists speaking of the universe as an interconnected whole, where opposing forces balance in delicate dance. And so, as the night deepens and the mind grows heavy, let Lao Tzu's legacy be a comfort. His influence is not a shout, but a whisper, not a footprint left in stone, but the impression of a breeze on water. The world changes as it must, but some truths remain, that the soft overcomes the hard, that the still heart sees clearly, that the way is open to all who walk it with patience. Breathe and let these thoughts drift like leaves on a slow river. There is no need to grasp them tightly. Lao Tzu's wisdom, like sleep itself, comes not by force, but by surrender. The same quiet that cradled his words now cradles you. As the stars turn overhead, as the earth spins softly through the dark, rest and know that the Tao moves in you too, as it always has, as it always will. With the gentleness of falling snow, we transition now to another meaningful chapter in this life story. One of the most enduring images of Lao Tzu is that of an old man riding a water buffalo, slow and steady, disappearing into the mist of the western mountains. Legend says that as he approached the border of China, a guard named Yin Zai recognized him as a sage and begged him to leave behind some wisdom before departing. Lao Tzu, moved by the man's sincerity, paused, not with reluctance, but with the quiet ease of one who understands that wisdom flows when the moment is right. Over the course of 3 days, he composed the 5,000 characters of the Tao Te Ching asterisk, a text so simple yet so deep that it would ripple across centuries, shaping minds without ever raising its voice. And then, just as softly as he had arrived, he passed beyond the gate, leaving no trace but the words themselves, like footprints in sand, soon erased by the wind. There are stories, too, of his early years, though they are wrapped in the soft haze of time. Some say he was born with white hair, already an old soul entering the world, his very presence a whisper of wisdom from the beginning. Others speak of him as a keeper of archives in the Zhou dynasty court, where he observed the rise and fall of kings, the endless striving of men for power, and saw how little it brought them in the end. It was said that in those halls of politics and ambition, Lao Tzu moved like a shadow present, but never entangled. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of quiet truth. Once a young official, full of zeal for reform, came to him seeking advice on how to change the kingdom. The young man frowned, puzzled. Because it follows the way of least resistance, Lao Tzu murmured, and perhaps the most revealing moment of his character comes from a small, often overlooked encounter with Confucius, another giant of Chinese thought. The two met when Confucius was still a young scholar, eager to learn from the elder sage. Confucius, with his meticulous rituals and firm ideas of order, asked Lao Tzu about the rites of antiquity, how to restore virtue in society, how to teach men to be good. Lao Tzu listened, then gently shook his head. The men you speak of, he said, have long withered, and only their words remain. The sage does not dwell in the past, nor strain toward the future. Confucius, struck by the response, later told his disciples that Lao Tzu was like a dragon, elusive, untamed, moving effortlessly between heaven and earth. There is another tale, softer still, of Lao Tzu in his later years, living in a small village far from the noise of courts and cities. The people there loved him, not for any grand teachings, but for the way he moved through life, patient, unhurried, like a leaf drifting on a pond. Children would follow him as he walked, not because he entertained them, but because his presence was calming, like the shade of an old tree. One evening, a villager came to him in distress, weeping over the loss of his home in a flood. Lao Tzu sat with him in silence for a long while, then said simply, "The river does not mean to harm you. It only follows its nature." The man, though still heartbroken, felt something loosen in his chest. It was not comfort in the usual sense, but a quiet expansion, as if the universe itself had made room for his grief. Even in his daily habits, Lao Tzu embodied the Tao. He ate when hungry, slept when tired, spoke only when words were necessary. A disciple once asked why he did not write more, why he left so much unsaid. Lao Tzu pointed to a cup of water. "When it is full, no more can be added," he said. These small moments, seemingly simple, carried the essence of his philosophy, that wisdom is not in accumulation, but in letting go. And then there is the story of his departure, the final mystery. Some say he lived to an impossible age, his body growing lighter and lighter until one day he simply faded into the mist. Others believe he wandered into the mountains, becoming one with the wilderness, his voice blending with the wind in the pines. Whatever the truth, his absence was as serene as his presence had been. No grand farewell, no monument, only the quiet certainty that he had become part of the Tao once more. Even now, in the stillness of night, you can almost hear the echo of his laughter, soft, knowing, unburdened. If you listen closely, you might sense him in the rustle of leaves, in the slow turn of the seasons, in the way water finds its own path downhill without a single moment of struggle. His life was not one of dramatic events or bold declarations, but of small, luminous moments where the ordinary revealed the eternal. So let these stories settle over you like a gentle fog, blurring the edges of thought, softening the weight of the day. There is no need to dissect them, only to let them drift through your mind, as effortless as clouds crossing the moon. And as sleep draws near, remember this: Lao Tzu's greatest teaching was not in his words, but in his way of being, showing us that the deepest truths are found not in striving, but in surrender, not in holding tight, but in letting go. The night is deep now, the world hushed. The same silence that cradled Lao Tzu cradles you, the same vast, patient darkness that held his wisdom holds your dreams. Rest and know that the Tao moves through all things, through the slow breath of the sleeping earth, through the quiet turning of the stars, through you, as you drift softly into the arms of the unknown. As your eyelids grow heavier, we'll softly explore another dimension of this fascinating biography. In the later years of his life, Lao Tzu moved like a shadow through the world, present, yet barely noticed, like the fading light at dusk. He had spent decades observing the flow of things, the rise and fall of dynasties, the endless dance of human ambition and nature's indifference. And as his time in the world grew shorter, he seemed to dissolve into it even more, becoming less a man and more a whisper, a breath carried on the wind. He settled in the quiet corners of the countryside, where the land rolled in gentle waves and the rivers moved without hurry. There, he watched the farmers tend their fields, the way they bowed to the earth without complaint, accepting both bounty and scarcity with the same quiet grace. These were his people now, not the scholars or the rulers who sought his wisdom, but the ones who lived closest to the Tao without ever speaking its name. In those final years, he wrote little, spoke even less. The words he had once penned, those few precious verses of the Tao Te Ching, were already drifting into the world like seeds on the breeze. He knew they would find their way to those who needed them, in their own time, in their own season. There was no need to force understanding, no need to explain. The Tao unfolded as it would, without effort, without insistence, Yet sometimes, in the cool of the evening, he would sit beneath an ancient tree, its branches heavy with the wisdom of centuries, and let his thoughts drift like smoke from a dying fire. He reflected on his life, not with pride or regret, but with the same detached curiosity one might have watching a stream ripple over stones. He had been a keeper of records once, a man of the court, surrounded by the noise of politics and power, but all that had faded, like ink washed away by rain. What remained was simpler, truer, the knowing that nothing needed to be held too tightly, not even wisdom itself. His few disciples, those who had followed him into the quiet, would sometimes gather around him in those twilight hours. They asked no grand questions, made no demands. They simply sat, breathing with him, listening to the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds settling for the night. And in those silences, he taught them more than he ever could with words. He showed them how to be still, how to let the world move through them without resistance. When the time came for him to depart, he did so without ceremony, without announcement. One morning, his hut was empty, his few belongings left undisturbed. There was no trace of struggle, no sign of farewell, only the faintest imprint on the mat where he had slept, already fading in the morning light. Some said he had wandered into the mountains, becoming one with the mist that clings to the peaks. Others believed he had simply ceased to be, dissolving back into the Tao from which he had come. But his words remained, tender as a bruise, soft as a sigh. The Tao Te Ching, that slender book of verses, began to pass from hand to hand, carried by travelers, recited by monks, whispered by mothers to their children at bedtime. It was not embraced all at once, not with the fervor of a grand revelation. Rather, it seeped into the world slowly, like water into dry earth, nourishing where it was needed, ignored where it was not. Over the centuries, his teachings spread not by conquest or decree, but by quiet recognition. Scholars debated his words, poets wove them into verse, rulers tried, and often failed, to govern by them. But the true heart of his message was never in the halls of power. It lived in the small moments, the way a potter shaped clay without force, the way a fisherman mended his net with patient hands, the way an old man sat by the roadside, watching the world go by without the need to chase it. His legacy was not in statues or temples built in his name, though those came in time. It was in the unspoken understanding that the wisest path is often the softest, that strength lies in yielding, that the universe does not need to be commanded, only attended to. He left no grand school, no rigid doctrine, only a suggestion, a gentle nudge toward the quiet that already existed inside every person, waiting to be noticed. And now, as you lie here in the stillness, you can feel it too, the same current that moved through him, moving through you. The same silence that cradled his final days cradles you now. There is nothing to achieve, nothing to grasp, only the slow, unhurried rhythm of breath, the gradual surrender to the night. The stars turn above, as they did in his time, indifferent to the passing of centuries. The wind still carries the scent of pine and earth, just as it did when he walked the mountain paths, and the Tao, that nameless, shapeless flow, continues as it always has through the rise and fall of civilizations, through the lives of those who never heard his name, through the dreams of those who, like you, are letting go at last. So rest, dear listener. Let the weight of his years, his wisdom, his gentle departure lull you deeper. There is no need to remember his words, only to feel their truth in your bones. In the quiet between heartbeats, the night holds you as it held him, and the same endless current carries you both now and always into the boundless dark. The gentle cadence of our story continues, flowing like a peaceful stream through the next chapter. Lao Tzu's wisdom did not vanish when he rode his ox beyond the western pass, leaving behind only the soft whisper of the Tao Te Ching. No, his words lingered, like morning mist on the mountains, seeping into the earth of human thought, shaping the contours of philosophy, art, and life itself. Across centuries, his teachings flowed like an underground river, sometimes unseen, but always moving, nourishing those who stumbled upon its waters. Long after his departure, the scholars of ancient China gathered his verses, turning them over like smooth stones in their hands, finding new meanings in the same unchanging truths. The Taoist tradition grew, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a way of living in harmony with the unforced rhythms of nature. Monasteries nestled in mist-covered hills became places where monks sought to embody Wu Wei, effortless action, breathing with the seasons, moving without struggle, like water finding its path around stone. When Buddhism traveled from India to China, it met Lao Tzu's legacy like two rivers merging. The quiet wisdom of Zen, with its emphasis on simplicity and presence, owes much to the Tao. The great masters of Chan and later Zen figures like Bodhidharma and Huangbo spoke in riddles and silence, much like Lao Tzu himself, reminding their students that the truth could not be captured in words, only glimpsed in the spaces between them. Centuries later, across oceans and cultures, his influence rippled outward. The transcendentalists of 19th century America, Emerson, Thoreau, and their companions, found in the Tao Te Ching a mirror to their own beliefs. Thoreau, as he retreated to Walden Pond, carried Lao Tzu's words like a compass, guiding him toward a life of simplicity and deep listening. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished, he might have whispered to the trees, echoing the ancient sage. In the quiet corners of modern psychology, too, Lao Tzu's ideas found new expression. Carl Jung, the explorer of the human soul, saw in the Tao a map of the unconscious, a reminder that wisdom often arises from surrender rather than control. Therapists today speak of flow states, those moments when effort falls away, and action becomes as natural as breathing, a distant cousin to Wu Wei. Even in the bustling chaos of contemporary life, his presence lingers. Architects design homes with feng shui, arranging space to align with the unseen currents of energy Lao Tzu called the Tao. Martial artists move through Tai Chi forms with slow, deliberate grace, embodying the principle of yielding to overcome. Poets and musicians speak of the empty space that gives meaning to sound, the silence between notes where the music truly lives. And then there are the quiet revolutionaries, those who resist without force, who change the world by first changing themselves. Figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. carried within them the spirit of Lao Tzu's teaching that true power lies not in domination, but in harmony, in the courage to bend like bamboo rather than break. Yet for all these grand echoes, perhaps the most enduring legacy of Lao Tzu is found in the small, unremarkable moments. In the parent rocking a child to sleep, not rushing, not forcing, but simply being. In the gardener who tends the soil without hurry, trusting the slow unfurling of growth. In the pause between breaths, the stillness before sleep, when the mind lets go and the heart remembers, without words, that it is part of something vast and gentle. So as you drift now, let these thoughts dissolve like salt in warm water. There is no need to hold them. Lao Tzu's wisdom was never meant to be accumulated, only felt like the coolness of a stream, like the hush of wind through leaves. The world changes, empires rise and fall, but the Tao remains, patient as the moon, steady as the turning earth. And in the quiet of this night, you too are part of that endless flow, no different from the sage who wandered the mountain paths, no different from the river that carves its course without resistance. Rest now, let go. The same current that carried him carries you, now and always, into the boundless dark. Wrapped in the comfort of these words, we'll drift together into the next part of this soothing biography. The story of Lao Tzu has been whispered through the centuries, like leaves rustling in an ancient forest, sometimes clear, sometimes fragmented, often reshaped by the hands of time. In the quiet hush of history, many have tried to capture his essence, to pin down his teachings like butterflies under glass. But like the Tao itself, Lao Tzu resists simplification. The myths that surround him are as layered as the mist on a mountain at dawn, shifting, dissolving, never quite solid. One of the most enduring misconceptions is that Lao Tzu was a solitary hermit, a figure who turned his back on the world entirely. It is true he left the court of the Zhou dynasty, weary of its politics and noise, but his departure was not an absolute rejection of human connection. Even in his retreat to the mountains, he was said to have spoken with gatekeepers, shared wisdom with travelers, and left traces of his presence in the lives of those he met. The idea of the lone sage, untouched by the world, is a romantic one, but the truth is softer, more fluid. Like water, Lao Tzu moved through society, sometimes withdrawing, sometimes returning, never entirely separate from the stream of life. Another common distortion is the belief that the Tao Te Ching is a book of passive resignation, encouraging stillness at the expense of action. This is a simplification that misses the delicate balance at the heart of his teachings. The Tao does not reject effort, but invites a different kind of movement, one that aligns with the natural rhythms of existence. Think of a willow bending in the wind, yielding yet unbroken. Lao Tzu's wisdom is not about inaction, but about wise action, like a farmer who knows when to sow and when to wait, when to tend, and when to let the earth rest. The Tao flows, and so must we, sometimes swiftly, sometimes slowly, but always in harmony with what is. There is also the lingering myth that Lao Tzu's philosophy is only for the wise, the enlightened, those who have already mastered life's complexities. But this too is a misunderstanding. His words were never meant to be locked away in temples or studied only by scholars. They were spoken simply for the farmer as much as the king, the child as much as the elder. The Tao is in the ordinary, the way a potter shapes clay without force, the way a bird builds its nest without instruction. You do not need to be a sage to understand it. You need only to notice, to listen, to let the teachings settle into your bones like the warmth of the sun after rain. Perhaps the most persistent myth is that Lao Tzu himself was a singular, unchanging figure, a fixed point in history. But the truth is, he may not have been one person at all. Some scholars suggest that the name Lao Tzu, meaning old master, was a title given to many wise teachers, their words collected over time like drops in a river. The Tao Te Ching itself may be the work of many hands, a chorus of voices rather than a single song. And in a way, this makes his legacy even more beautiful, not bound to one man, but woven into the fabric of countless lives, each adding their own thread to the tapestry. Even the story of his departure, riding a water buffalo into the western mountains, may be more metaphor than fact. It is a tale that invites us to consider not where he went, but what he left behind, not a rigid doctrine, but an invitation to flow like water, to soften like the willow, to trust the unseen current that guides all things. The myths around him may blur the edges of his life, but they do not diminish his wisdom. If anything, they remind us that truth is not always found in certainty, but in the spaces between, the quiet moments where the heart understands what the mind cannot grasp. And so, as you rest now, let these thoughts drift like petals on a pond. There is no need to untangle every myth, to resolve every contradiction. Lao Tzu's teachings were never about answers, but about deepening the questions, about learning to dwell in the mystery. The night wraps around you like the softest silk, and in its embrace, you too are part of the endless, unfolding story, no more separate from the Tao than a wave is separate from the sea. Breathe and let go. The river carries you, as it has carried all who came before, into the gentle dark, where all things merge and begin again. Now, as we continue our gentle journey through this remarkable life, let us explore the next chapter. As we come to the close of this quiet reflection on Lao Tzu, let us settle into the soft embrace of his legacy, not as a fixed monument, but as a living whisper carried on the wind. His life, whether the story of a single sage or the collected wisdom of many, is like the Tao itself, impossible to grasp, yet impossible to ignore. It flows through time, shaping thoughts, softening hearts, and inviting us to release our need for control, to trust in the natural order of things. Consider how he is remembered today. Not with grand temples demanding reverence, though statues of him may sit in quiet corners of gardens and meditation halls, his kind eyes gazing into eternity, not with strict rules or commandments, though his words have guided emperors and peasants alike. Instead, his presence lingers in the spaces between in the way. A tree bends without breaking. In the patience of a river carving stone, in the exhale that follows a deep breath, the Tao Te Ching, whether written by one hand or many, remains one of the most translated books in the world, not because it demands to be heard, but because it speaks in a voice that feels almost familiar, like a memory just beyond reach. His teachings have seeped into the soil of countless cultures, blending with philosophies, religions, and ways of life far beyond the borders of ancient China. Zen monks trace their roots to his influence, poets borrow his imagery, and modern seekers of peace return to his words like an old friend. Even those who have never read a line of the Tao Te Ching may find themselves living its principles, letting go of struggle, embracing simplicity, sensing the quiet rhythm beneath the noise of the world. What is truly remarkable is how little he seems to have needed recognition. Unlike many great figures of history, Lao Tzu did not seek followers, did not build institutions, did not leave behind a trail of conquests or monuments. His power lies in his absence, in the way he slips through the fingers of history like mist. He is said to have written the Tao Te Ching only reluctantly, as a parting gift before vanishing into the mountains. And perhaps that is the final lesson, that the deepest wisdom does not cling, does not insist, but simply offers itself and then withdraws, like the moon behind clouds. In our modern world, where noise and haste so often drown out stillness, his voice remains a gentle antidote. Mindfulness teachers quote him without always knowing his name. Therapists encourage patients to go with the flow, echoing his teachings on water, the softest thing, yet capable of wearing away the hardest stone. Environmentalists find in him an ancient advocate for harmony with nature, for living as part of the whole rather than seeking to dominate it. His influence is everywhere, not because it shouts, but because it endures in the quiet ways we return to balance when we have strayed too far, And what of the man himself, if he was indeed a man, and not a myth woven from many lives? The stories say he grew weary of the world's strife, of the endless striving and grasping that he saw around him, and so he left, riding westward on his water buffalo, leaving behind only a few pages of poetry that would outlast empires. There is something deeply comforting in that image, not a dramatic end, not a martyr's death, but a quiet departure, a melting back into the landscape from which he came. It invites us to consider our own exits, not with fear, but with the understanding that we too are part of an endless cycle, coming and going like the seasons. As you lie here now, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of your body sinking into rest, you are already practicing his wisdom. There is no effort needed, no force required, just allowing, just being. The thoughts that drift through your mind are like clouds passing over a mountain, noticed but not held. The rise and fall of your breath is the same rhythm that moves the tides, that sways the grass, that guided Lao Tzu's pen across the page so long ago. You are not separate from this. You never were, so let his legacy be not a thing to study, but a feeling to return to, a remembering that the answers were never outside you, that the peace you seek is already here, in the space between one breath and the next. The world will continue to turn with all its noise and motion, but you, in this moment, can be like the eye of the storm, undisturbed. And now, as the night deepens and the stars keep their silent watch, let go of even these words. They too are just ripples on the water, already fading. There is nothing more to understand, nothing to achieve. Only rest, only trust. The same force that guided Lao Tzu guides you now, not as a teacher, not as a sage, but as the effortless current of life itself. Close your eyes. Let the darkness hold you. And as you drift toward sleep, know that you are exactly where you need to be, as Lao Tzu was, as all things are perfectly, softly, endlessly part of the Tao. Good night.